Good morning. Good morning, everyone. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for being here. I can't tell you how happy we are to have you all here at the Newport Mansions and for our new, for coming for the symposium. We're so excited to be able to have this function again and are so pleased that everyone could come today. This is day 2 of the symposium. This is of the symposium, The French Influence in Newport. My name is Susan Petrovas. I'm a trustee for the Preservation Society, and I also sit on the Collections Committee, in addition to a number of other committees. I hope you all enjoyed yesterday's presentations, and I thought it was really unique the way that we were able to break out in the afternoon, and I hope that you also enjoyed the one-on-one smaller breakouts to be able to look at some of the interesting things that we have here in Newport. Newport's role in preserving this remarkable slice of history and showcasing the global significance that Newport holds in history of design and cultural exchange is about to get even more fun today. I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker of the day, Dr. Justine de Jong, who will dazzle us with her talk, Newport and the Art of Parisian Chic. I just wanted to take a minute. Yesterday we were at Rosecliff, which that ballroom alone is unbelievable. But take a minute and look at this room that we're in. I mean, it's just really incredible. And, what a better spot for us all to be to listen to everything that we're going to hear today, all the exciting lectures. Dr. de Jong is the Associate Professor and Chair of the History of Art of the Art Department at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City. She specializes in the intersection of art and fashion, teaching courses on modern art and fashion history. Her latest book, The Art of Parisian Chic, which is this is actually for sale I think it's downstairs in the bookstore. Yesterday it was in the front. And Dr. de Jong would be happy to sign any if anyone purchases the book today. I bought it yesterday and was perusing it last night, and it's quite interesting, and I think that you would all enjoy it. In the book, she decodes the details of dress, behavior, and styling that defined the late 19th century Parisian woman and traces the invention of the chic Parisian in art and life. Dr. de Jong also is the editor of Fashion in European Art, Dress and Identity, Politics of the Body. She wrote that in 2019. And of the Fashion History Timeline website, which offers expert-written decades of overviews, a fashion dictionary, and hundreds of essays on fashion in art, museums, and film. She also contributes to exhibition catalogs, including Impressionism, Fashion and Modernity, Tissot, The Fashion and Faith, and Inside Out, The Prince of Mary Cassatt. So I think we're all going to be extremely interested in everything that you have to present to us today. So welcome, Dr. de Jong.
Thank you, Susan, for that kind introduction, and thank you all for coming today. As this is undoubtedly the grandest room I've ever presented in, I thought it only appropriate that I begin with the image of someone who would feel right at home here, Consuelo Vanderbilt. Marble House, as I'm sure you all know, was built by William K. Vanderbilt and his wife, Alva, who we'll see later. Consuelo was their daughter. Here she was photographed by L. Ullman and Co. in New York in 1895. Later that same year, she would go on to marry the Duke of Marlborough and become a duchess. Throughout the presentation, I've inserted the logo of the Preservation Society of Newport County next to photographs, dresses, and artworks in the Society's collection. Here, Consuelo wears a dress that, if not French, is at least very closely aligned to French trends, as you can see with this comparison to a figure in the Parisienne Moniteur de la Mode. It features the high collar, large Lego mutton sleeves, and cinched waist, then popular, with a striped skirt and several large bows. Consuelo's bows are the reverse of those in the plate. In the 19th century, French fashion was king. Elite women across the world, from Tokyo to Toronto, from Naples to Newport, sought not only to dress in the latest Parisian styles, but also to master the art of Parisian chic, aligning their dress, appearance, and behavior in line with expectations of the time, as my book and the talk today will briefly explore. Today, I'll give you an overview of how 19th century women in France and America were seen, how they aspired to be seen, and how they navigated public life in Belle Epoque Paris, Newport, and beyond. Consuelo would, of course, also go to Paris. Here you see her looking particularly fabulous alongside her father. Members of the elite went to the races not only to watch the racing, but to see and be seen. As this fashion plate from the Moniteur de la Mode indicates, the races were a site of fashionable display where some of the newest Parisian fashions would be seen and photographed. In the Gilded Age, trips to Paris were a must for the American elite who lived in Newport. Here we see Gwendolyn King, who was born in Newport to David King and Ella Reeves. She grew up in one of Newport's most prominent families and became a leading figure in the city's social world. She became the proud mistress of Kingscott. This photograph was taken at the Otto Wegener studio in Paris in 1899. Having yourself photographed in the latest fashions became an essential part of the lives of 19th century women of all classes. Note that the photograph has been retouched to give the fashionable hourglass silhouette of the day. You can see some of the small telltale gray shadowing at her waist, especially on the right-hand side of the photograph. These photographs would have been given to friends and family, as you see with the two different copies presented here. She wears a fabulous Art Nouveau style dress with flame-like decoration at the bust and elbows. Americans in Paris were featured as one of the city's attractions in the caricature produced during the 1878 Paris World's Fair. We see men ogling women of all nationalities at the opera, where courtesans and respectable elite women both attended. The first loge is of Parisiennes, dressed in tight, extremely low-cut gowns featuring ample décolletage. The caption explains that the first two women are seeking, quote, 2 or 3 devoted hearts to pay for 3 years of bills from the couturier, an offer valid for the length of the fair. The heart pierced with an arrow at the center of the caricature tellingly reads, Mariage temporaire et international limited co. By contrast, the Englishwomen beside them are said to be looking for companions for riding, lawn tennis, and shopping at the Louvre and Bon Marché department stores, which they are said to frequent from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day. Note the conceit that Parisiennes get their dresses from a couturier, whereas Englishwomen only patronize department stores. The Spanish women next to them are merely looking for an introduction into aristocratic Parisian society. The American Yankees in the next loge are looking for aristocratic husbands, while their poor Native American cousins are hoping to make careers on the stage at the Folies Bergère or the Hippodrome. Contemporary French stereotypes of women of different nationalities are thus helpfully summarized for the amusement of the reader. The dress of the reclining American woman with a bird on her bodice reminded me of this photograph of Carolina La Belle Otero, a Spanish dancer, actress, and courtesan. Emperor Napoleon III had built that flashy new opera house seen in the caricature, which you can still visit today, as part of his transformation of Paris. Note the fashionable black-clad Parisienne that Barraud includes crossing the street in front of the Opera Garnier. Napoleon III knocked down countless buildings to build the long, straight, broad new boulevards that Monet shows us in the center image, and added streetlights, benches, advertising columns, and urinals. Building codes mandated that any new buildings share the same general aesthetic, creating the beautiful harmony that's so well known today. Thousands of similar 6-story buildings with elegant iron balconies were built across the city. Napoleon III transformed the royal parks into public parks. Life was lived in public as never before. All of Paris became a show. Napoleon III was the nephew of the first, more famous Napoleon, and he had seized power in a coup in 1851, establishing France's Second Empire. Empress Eugenie became an important fashion leader and client of the young British fashion designer Charles Frederick Worth, whose designs would take Paris by storm. She even modeled for the fashion plate you see on the left to promote French tailors who produced riding habits. She sought to dethrone London as the best source for riding habits and make Paris the leader for all of women's fashion. Riding surged in popularity thanks to her example. You could even rent horses for an afternoon ride if you couldn't afford to own one yourself. The 19th century witnessed the rise of the middle class thanks to the Industrial Revolution. Mechanized mass production made everything cheaper than it had been before. Incomes rose. Guild restrictions that had limited shops to selling one type of good had been abolished by the French Revolution, paving the way for the rise of the grand department store that sold everything you might need under one glamorous roof. Department stores like Printemps and Bon Marché, which you see in these images, would have each had up to 70,000 customers a day. The news illustration at right shows the crush of people that would crowd the stores, especially on sales days. In 1881, Printemps had burned down, and so the owner took the opportunity to build it back even bigger, as you see in Barraud's painting with all the scaffolding on the right. Department stores were places of wonder, affordable luxury sold to both the elite and the masses. As Barraud's painting suggests, there were more people on the streets than ever before. Paris's population had surged to nearly 2 million people, versus 500,000 at the beginning of the century. Paris felt new and strange. There were fashionably dressed people everywhere. You could no longer tell for certain who someone was on the street just by looking at them. Indeed, Napoleon III's Second Empire witnessed the democratization of fashion. Dressing in fashionable silhouettes became possible for the first time across classes. Even working-class women could afford a cheap steel crinoline cage or bustle. With mechanical looms, fabric prices plunged. Even working-class dressmakers, like the ones you see here, could dress like proper bourgeois women. Here we have two dressmakers dressed like their clients, the women they made clothing for. Fashion magazines also included paper dress patterns, like you see here. Some were even created by the couture designers like Worth. Women could copy them at home or bring them to their dressmaker, making the latest styles wildly available. The Parisienne became central to the image of modern Paris and became an ideal for women of all classes, beginning in the 1860s. The Parisienne is the iconic Parisian woman known worldwide for her innate elegance and her exquisite taste. She was confident, sophisticated, impeccably dressed, not just chasing the latest styles, and a bit flirty. She reflected the body ideals of the time, which favored a slender waist and generous bust. The Parisienne came to embody notions of good taste and of chic. When everyone can dress fashionably and fashion is constantly changing, you need good taste to know how to flatter your own looks and not become a fashion victim. When Carlos Durand exhibited this portrait of his wife, Pauline Croisette, at the 1869 Salon, she was celebrated as the perfect Parisienne. She wears a fashionable but not showy black dress. She clearly knows what flatters her. Black had become a favorite color choice for the chic Parisienne, as it appeared elegant and restrained when the streets were filled with women in bright colors, made possible by the recent invention of artificial dyes. In the 1860s, bright colors were fashionable, but they weren't chic or tasteful. Croisette has a small red rose at her breast, but a yellow tea rose in her bonnet. A confident choice, not too matchy-matchy, made by a chic Parisienne. She stares out at us serenely, almost as an invitation, as she pulls on the pinky of her left glove. We notice she's dropped the right glove onto the ground, which invites us to gallantly pick it up. Critics and the public were charmed. Edward Manet's Jean was also celebrated as a chic Parisienne. The 16-year-old Jean de Marcy, who would go on to a successful career as an actress and courtesan, modeled for Manet. Jean wears an appropriately high-necked pale day dress, decorated with small blue and yellow flowers. Buttery kid-skin gloves cover her forearms, and a single gold bangle ornaments her wrist. Jean's choice to pair a bonnet with bold black ribbon ties with a pale silk floral day dress was immediately arresting and extremely chic. Parisiennes were praised for their individual flair and risk-taking in making such bold juxtapositions. Adhering to a monochromatic look, as the woman in brown to her right does, required less personal style. An 1882 caricature playfully describes the ideal silhouette of the Parisienne du jour. Using an architectural diagram, it emphasizes the extent to which de Marcy embodied the physical ideal of the time. Implicit in the du jour label is the acknowledgement that these ideal proportions frequently change, as indeed they did. De Marcy's image was later used, likely without her consent, to promote Duke cigarettes and a series of playing cards featuring French actresses. An American company choosing to associate its brand with women from the French stage underlines the Parisienne's global power in signifying chic and sexual allure and driving sales. De Marcy regularly emphasized her attractive figure to good effect in photographs. The shiny satin bodice draws attention to her slender figure, which was made even more trim with the help of the photo retoucher, who slimmed down her waist and smoothed her back to create even more extreme proportions. This fashionable ideal was communicated to the world via the press, particularly the French fashion press, which exploded in this period. Not only the number of fashion magazines, but their circulation numbers dramatically increased. As Paris came to dominate the women's magazine world, its preeminent fashion journals circulated worldwide to hundreds of thousands of readers, and international sales by its couturiers soared. Their distribution spanned 6 continents. The Moniteur de la Mode published 8 foreign editions, and Le Mode Illustré accepted subscribers from more than 50 countries, and from territories from as far away as China, Australia, and the Marquesas. Parisian plates were sold to women's magazines in other countries, pirated and plagiarized. Fashion magazines were available in various sizes and at different price points. Le Mode Miniature on the left was only 4 by 6 inches, half the size of the much larger Moniteur des Dames et Demoiselles on the right. Many Newport women would have subscribed directly to the French magazines, but French fashions were also very easily seen in American magazines like Harper's Bazaar. Here you can see a June 1868 Le Mode Illustré plate that Harper's Bazaar plagiarized the next month. Here, Peterson's magazine has simply traced a dress from another French magazine, which explains the reversed image on the right. They combined it with a different copied dress in a new setting. Newport women could shop in Paris, but shopping was also a vibrant part of life in Newport. Bellevue Avenue even featured a branch of the famous London tailoring firm Redfern. In the French imagination, Americans were thought to have a particular look. Spoiler alert, it wasn't a very flattering one. I've illustrated it here with a painting by Manet called In the Conservatory. It was modeled for by Jean and Jules Guillemet. Jean Guillemet, as her name suggests, was actually French, but several critics at the time thought she looked American. They called her ungainly and an empty lobster. The matching accessories and plain conservative nature of the dress, which resembled the less fashionable black and white plates, not the chicest color ones, made her appear American. Other actual American women defied that stereotype, but shocked critics with their sexiness, confidence, and obvious makeup, which made them appear more like courtesans than fashionable Parisiennes. The problem with Madame X was not the dress, but how she wore it. Her heavy makeup, lavender powdered skin, black brow, fallen strap, and aloof conviction of her own beauty put off critics. Having a successful portrait exhibited at the Paris Salon could make or break a woman's reputation. Comtesse Alice de Lancy was in fact Julia Tall, a rich American divorcée from Baltimore who had had affairs with several prominent aristocrats. In France, Tall changed her name to Alice and bestowed the title Comtesse de Lancy on herself. There was no Count de Lancy. Having rich, titled lovers who lavished her with gifts, she has been labeled a courtesan by some writers today, but critics at the time were less certain. Carlos Durand's portrait was a sensation at the 1877 Salon. Every detail was designed to provoke, from de Lancy's seductive stare to her petite feet in shiny gold-heeled shoes. She reclines in a lavish princess-line white silk satin ball gown with plunging décolletage and with a long train fanned out beneath her. One critic declared her, quote, a dazzling model of contemporary elegance. There is a strange and attractive seduction in this pretty woman in a white satin dress stretched out on a sofa, her left hand supporting the most adorable head in the world, and the other holding, like a weapon, a fan. The sparkling look of defiant provocation is below the surface, while the most coquettishly feminine smile accentuates the irritating and charming expression. 1 minute. Virginie Gautreau and Julia Tall weren't the only Americans to seek public approval of their chic. This portrait of Josephine Mellon Southwick heir was also painted by Carolus Durand and exhibited at the 1892 Paris Salon. One review labeled heir a professional beauty, an English term that signified a woman for whom, quote, everything is necessarily linked to the cult of oneself and to the desire to increase adoration and admiration around oneself. It wasn't a compliment, but he went on to praise the sumptuous fabrics, which he declared rigorously fashionable. Mrs. Astor herself had her portrait painted by Carolus Durand in 17th century fancy dress, which was quite fashionable at the time. This rather surprising portrait of Gertrude Vanderbilt, who spent her childhood summers at the Breakers, was painted by the French painter Charles Chaplin when she was 15. Chaplin famously had a painting school for young ladies, which perhaps the young Gertrude visited. He was known for rosy depictions of young women, often in a state of undress. Gertrude would go on to found the Whitney Museum, which perhaps explains the rather avant-garde choice to model for Chaplin in such frothy drapery rather than a more conventional gown. The beautiful and unlucky in love, Elizabeth Wharton Drexel, dressed fashionably and had herself painted by Giovanni Boldini in 1905 in a divine off-the-shoulder persimmon gown. This portrait is on view at the Elms. The choices women made in what they wore and how they wore it, as well as who they had paint or photograph them, were always being scrutinized, as the Countess Dash reveals. By the mere inspection of a woman's exterior appearance, another woman, if she has the intelligence and habit, will know what class she belongs to, what was her education, what society she has seen. She will even discern her tastes, her character, if she takes the trouble to observe. Often her manner of arranging her shawl, of putting on her hat, of fastening her gloves, reveals an entire existence. They were very confident they were right. Identifying who people were by how they dressed and acted became a popular entertainment in Paris. Think of the critics who thought they spotted an American in Manet's conservatory. Identifying types relied on stereotypical expectations of how certain types of people acted and dressed. Genre paintings like this one, that featured clearly legible types of people, surged in popularity. This painting by Charles Géron, titled The Two Sisters, is nearly 21 feet wide and more than 14 feet tall, much larger than the stage. Critics identified more than 20 different types in the painting, but I'll only point out 3. Read the book if you want to learn more. First, note the chic Parisienne buying flowers in the right-hand corner. But now let's zoom in on the central drama that the title references. We see a courtesan riding in a carriage. We can tell from the luxury of her open carriage and her showy dress. She's wearing light colors when dark colors like those worn by the Parisienne were typically worn out and about in the city. She's out to attract attention and is noticeably alone except for her tiny white dog. Her hatless working-class sister is simply dressed in a blue striped dress with black apron, walking with 2 children at her side. Her husband is also there, incongruously holding a pickaxe and a baby. She calls out to her sister in the carriage with an accusatory gesture. We're to imagine that she's rebuking her sister for her life of vice. Understanding the drama of the picture requires understanding how women were expected to dress and act at different times of day. To give you a taste of what those in the period were looking for, I will end with a quick overview of the types of dress typically worn for different occasions using French garments from the Preservation Society's collection. To learn more, read my book, which goes into depth on the 5 most fashionable types of 19th century women: the mistress, the sexy widow, the woman on horseback, the savvy shop girl, and of course, the chic Parisienne. Mastering the art of Parisian chic meant aligning one's dress, behavior, and appearance in line with the expectations of the time, as we heard earlier. Like women today, with our PJs, our around-the-house clothes, our workout clothes, our going-to-work clothes, our going-out clothes, well-to-do women in the 19th century had large wardrobes of clothing for different purposes. Emmeline Raymond, the editor of Le Mode Illustré, explained, Parisiennes have a dress of every kind: a morning dress for going out, an indoor dress, a visiting dress, and a walking dress, a dinner dress, and an evening dress, if they're in positions to attend such events. In Manet's Nana, you can see the most of the foundation garments worn by 19th century women, a chemise topped with a corset, paired with stockings and pantalettes, which were essentially divided bloomers. The somewhat bored gentleman who waits for Nana still has his hat on, a sign that he is quite comfortable in his position, as it was rude to wear a hat indoors in the presence of ladies. Nana is clearly not his wife, but his mistress. The only thing Nana is missing is the petticoat skirt that would have added fullness to a skirt and supported it. Hers is on the chair on the left. Morisot's young woman, like Nana, is also powdering herself. Indeed, powder was acceptable on all women. But Nana is also applying red lipstick, which was not. Morisot's woman wears a chemise topped with a peignoir, which is a dressing gown. Here you can see similar peignoirs advertised in fashion magazines. Like a robe today, these would be worn when getting ready for the day. A corset was not yet worn. Dressing gowns could be quite elaborate, especially those made by elite couturiers. Here you see one by the House of Worth and another by a lesser-known Parisian couture house in Newport collections. One of my favorite discoveries when writing the book was Jean de Marcy's lingerie bill for 6,000 francs from a single dressmaker in 1889. The 480-franc nightgown provoked the most amazement in the press. At the time, a female fashion worker in Paris earned only 540 francs for the entire year. So this was a very pricey garment, a very pricey nightgown. Robes d'intérieur were dresses worn indoors. They were worn at home with a corset, but without gloves. They were often in light colors and elaborately decorated with bows and ruffles. Bertha Russell in the Gilded Age wears a copy of the gown in Tissot's Summer, but without the bows that would have been essential in the 19th century. Mornings were also a fashionable time for going riding, which elite and even bourgeois women would be expected to know how to do in the Belle Epoque. Here we see Gwendolyn King Armstrong on her honeymoon outside Rome in 1901, wearing a London-made tailored wool habit. Carolus Duran painted his sister-in-law, the actress Sophie Croisette, who was Sarah Bernhardt's chief rival at the Comédie Française, on horseback in 1873. The life-size portrait was 11 feet tall and 10 feet wide, and again was the sensation at the 1873 Salon. I've seen this in person, and it's truly life-size, so it's very impressive. It really helped her reputation as an actress to be a bit more sophisticated. In the afternoon, women would go visit friends, go shopping, or perhaps go for a walk. Gwendolyn King Armstrong wears a walking dress complete with parasol in this photo taken in Caen. Walking dresses covered the chest, and in the city, they were often in darker colors to hide dirt. They often lacked trains or had only small ones to make walking on the street easier. They were always worn with gloves and hats. They were suitable for visiting art exhibitions or window shopping, as we see here. Suiting-inspired looks and tailored coats were also worn, like these seen on the Berwind sisters. At the seaside, like in Newport, lighter colors could be worn, and a parasol was essential. Here you see two dresses suitable to be worn on a cliff walk in Newport. The Normandy coast had similar promenades. A walking stick, like that held by the woman in red, was only used in the countryside. Fishing nets were optional for beachside entertainment. Small handbags were commonly worn. Gwendolyn King Armstrong demonstrates proper parasol technique, like that seen in the Le Mode Illustré plate. Note that fashion plates should not always be taken as accurate depictions of what could be worn where. The woman in the floral brocade evening gown holding the large red fan is dressed to go to dinner, not the beach. We know this from the V-shaped back and the short sleeves. As there was only one color plate each week, sometimes looks from different times of day would be fancifully combined into a single setting. Women also visited their friends in the afternoon for tea and conversation. Visiting dresses were often in luxe fabrics like silk or velvet and featured more lace and trimmings than walking dresses. They also could be lighter colors, as women would ride in carriages to go on these visits. Given the more luxurious style of visiting dresses, women often commissioned both a high-necked day bodice and a short-sleeved evening bodice to go with the same silk skirt. Very practical. In 1883, it was very fashionable to pair a floral brocade skirt with a solid bodice and bustle, as we see in the Worth visiting dress in the Preservation Society's collection. At right, you can see the horsehair lining used to stiffen the skirt. A woman's petticoat would keep that rougher fabric from touching her stockings. These close-ups let you see the navy twill bodice is also a brocade fabric with a subtle polka dot pattern. The skirt has a beautiful three-dimensional quality from the pattern being woven into the textile rather than printed. These dresses were also sometimes called reception dresses, as they could also be worn to receive guests at home. You're going to be lucky enough to view this gown this afternoon in person. It features a long train, which was typical of visiting and reception dresses, which need not be as practical as walking dresses. This early 1890s striped silk satin day dress was again made by the House of Worth. Black and white stripes were extremely fashionable, as you can see in this photograph at the races, and in this portrait of the Chicago socialite, Catherine Van Etta Medill McCormick by Paul Halou. Here is another House of Worth day dress, this time made of black cut velvet and brocade. As we saw earlier with Carolus Duran's portrait of his wife, black was considered very chic in the second half of the 19th century as it signaled good taste. In the 1890s, an alternative to the formal reception dress arose. The tea gown was worn at home without a corset. It had a looser fit, often cinched at the waist with a belt, as we see Alva Vanderbilt wear it on the left. The portrait is just over there if you want to go see it after the talk. The department store Liberty of London helped popularize the style, but it was fashionable in France and America as well. The Preservation Society has a gray tea gown with sapphire velvet collar made by the Bon Marché department store in Paris that you see here. In the evening, women wore dinner dresses or evening dresses, including ball gowns. At the theater, depending on where one sat, one could wear a full evening gown with small sleeves and full décolletage, as we see on the woman in the pink striped gown. Or one can wear a so-called half dress, which featured elbow-length sleeves, but also a more plunging neckline. In the evening, in stark contrast to the day, a woman's chest was typically exposed. While jewelry was more conservative in the day, in the evening, more elaborate jewelry, like that seen on Renoir's courtesan, was de rigueur. We know she's a courtesan from the heavy makeup and the inattentive date, who seems to be on the lookout for his next conquest. Here are two beautiful cream and pink silk dinner dresses. No, women would wear gloves in the evening, but would remove them whenever they were eating or drinking. Hats were not worn, but flowers and other hair ornaments were. Carolyn Slidell Belmont wears a large pearl earring and necklace set paired with gold bracelets. This striking chartreuse and pink silk evening ensemble features the expected plunging neckline. The ball gown is the most familiar form of evening dress, of course. Here, a beautiful aqua blue silk brocade evening gown by Charles Frederick Worth from the 1870s. You'll also have the opportunity to see this one this afternoon. And we see Tessie Fair Ulrichs of Rosecliff demonstrating the elaborate jewelry, long gloves, and dramatic updos that accompanied evening gowns. So I can't wait to see this one this afternoon. Ball gowns had minimal sleeves, often paired with an off-the-shoulder neckline. Here's a beautiful Worth evening dress, now held at the Costume Institute, ornamented with artificial flowers, as was typical. You hopefully should now recognize that the Petersons' plagiarized plate has awkwardly included a reception dress alongside the 4 other ball gowns. Such a conservative gown would not have fashionably been worn in the evening. Berthe Morisot loved her black evening gown so much, she even had a model wear it for a painting, adding a few artificial blossoms to the skirt. Newport women were also fond of black, as we see in this strikingly modern Worth bodice and on the Duchess of Manchester. White was another popular color, particularly with young ladies, as it contrasted dramatically with the black tie worn by men. Here's a beautiful Doucet evening bodice in ivory silk brocade in the Newport collection. This beautiful orange floral brocade gown by the House of Worth is one of my favorites in Newport. It was worn by Ella Reeves King in Paris. The rich brocade fabric features large yellow and green peonies. The V-neck sleeveless bodice is trimmed with yellow tulle and beaded decoration. Asymmetrical draping was one of Worth's hallmarks. This stunning black and white velvet Sisley evening gown by the House of Worth reminded me of another Worth gown in the Met's collection that was recreated for Bertha in the Gilded Age. One final type of dress that was often sourced from Paris was, of course, the wedding gown. Most 19th century weddings were during the day, and so wedding dresses featured high necklines and long sleeves like all other day wear. Artificial orange blossom trimmings were fashionable, as we see here on Ella Reeves King. This cream evening gown by Charles Frederick Worth has elbow-length sleeves and an open neckline, suggesting that this wedding was held rather unusually in the evening. This ivory brocade wedding gown features abstract swirls and is lavishly ornamented with pearls, gold beads, sequins, and lace. It only seems appropriate to end as we began with the famous Vanderbilt. In this case, the wedding gown by Jacques Doucet of Gertrude Vanderbilt, who married Harry Payne Whitney in 1896. Gertrude's gown by Doucet was remarked for its relative simplicity. I hope I've given you a small sense of what it was like to dress and live as a 19th century woman. I encourage you to read the book, on sale in the gift shop, to learn more. Thank you all for coming. I look forward to your questions.
Please raise your hand and I'll come around with the microphone. Don't be shy this morning.
Hi, thank you so much for that talk. It was brilliant and brilliant images as well. I was curious about the manipulation of the photographs that they did. Do you know how they actually ended up changing people's waistlines? Like, what was the process behind that?
It was part of the developing process that they would go in as they were developing and sort of just carve it away. I'm not a photographer, so I don't know like the exact logistics, but it was while it was being developed that they would sort of manipulate the solution and the texture of the picture to sort of hide it. But you usually can see some sort of telltale shadiness. But it's very common. So especially for riding portraits, I talk about in the book that it's estimated about 90% of pictures of women riding horses, they've shaved down the waist.
That was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, what was the department store experience like? Now you've got everything in different sizes and you take it off the rack. These things look much more complicated. Were there a lot of things in different sizes? Was there a tailor on site to help women do things at the store as there sometimes is today? Or did they have to go home and have things altered accordingly afterwards?
So it really varies based on the decade. So in the 1860s, virtually nothing was available to buy off the rack other than like things that weren't fitted, like a peignoir, a dressing gown, or a shawl, things like that wouldn't have been tailored. But they did have dressmaking departments. So a lot of what was going on is that you would go see a particular style and then they would create it for you in the store, like not at that moment, but you would place an order, and then much like going to a couturier, it would be ready a few days or weeks later, depending on how elaborate it was. But starting in the 1870s, we do start to see a lot of ready-to-wear start to be featured. This is in part because of the advent of tailoring. So all of these tailors that are starting to make riding habits, because it's become so popular, they use those tailoring skills to make other forms of women's wear. And so we really have the first sort of emergence, because just to explain, the gowns being previously made for women were being sort of draped on the body. They weren't based on measurements, but tailors used measurements, which led to the invention of ready-to-wear, because you can use measurements then to create sizes. And so some of the earliest ready-to-wear that we get is actually morning clothes, because you would suddenly need it, right? Like if someone unexpectedly died, you would suddenly need to go buy a whole new wardrobe, right? And so having it ready was really helpful. But most women in the 19th century were probably still having their dresses made, at least elite women. Buying off the rack was also still relatively expensive. So at the both high end and low end, women were either having their clothes made or making their own clothes. It was sort of the lower middle classes who might buy the sort of department store ready to wear in general, although it got fancier as the decades progressed. So by the 80s and 90s, you might have our English women and maybe some Newport women buying dresses in the department stores as well. We only saw one department store gown, and it was a tea gown, which is again not fitted. Yeah.
Delightful, Dr. DeYoung. This is so much fun. Are there any exhibitions you're working on, next projects? And tell us more about Newport's treasures. It's really fun to see that. emblem on so many dresses.
Yes, so thank you for that. I am writing for an exhibition catalog on the Amazons, The Woman on Horseback. The show is opening in May in Arles. There's a new fashion museum in the south of France. So they have the sort of woman on horseback through the centuries. So that is the next exhibition that I'm contributing to. And my next booked project is actually on an artist. There's two of her paintings in the current book named Louise Abema. She was perhaps most famous today as a lover of Sarah Bernhardt, but she was an extremely successful artist in the 19th century and early 20th century. And she's just been sort of overlooked, I think, because of her more famous association. Bernhardt has sort of swallowed all the attention. But she was extremely talented. She got compared to the Impressionists. And so I'm trying to write her back into the story of Impressionism. Oh, in terms of Newport clothes, yeah, I think that they're fantastic. I haven't seen any of them in person yet, but I'm looking forward to this afternoon when I'll get to see at least two of them.
One final call for questions.
Hi, thank you. Was there ever a time when the French were not fashion forward? I mean, not in my life.
It's true that the French were fashion leaders, but there are moments in the sort of long expanse of fashion history. You know, France only became a power in the sort of Middle Ages. Right? The Romans were really much better at fashion in the earlier periods. No, I mean, there's always been a strong luxury industry in Paris. But whether or not, the thing that's distinctive about the 19th century is that France really comes to dominate women's wear like globally, right? That they were always recognized for having luxury goods, in part thanks to kings like Louis XIV. We're going to hear more about textiles, or you've already heard more about textiles, really focusing on brocade, silk, textile production. So there really was a concerted effort, both by the kings and then by people like Napoleon III, to support these industries. And so it wasn't by chance, right? Like they really did do a whole marketing push. And Napoleon III, for example, really mandated that women couldn't repeat dresses, right? They had to wear French silks. The same was true actually of Louis XIV. And so they very deliberately poured all of the French money into the fashion trades. And so it paid off. But yes, in the 19th century, we see an early instance of globalization with, the fashion press and even the couturiers, Worth famously dressed the Empress of Japan, right? Like, so there were clothing, was being transported worldwide. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sandra Massey, and like everyone in this room, I'm a fan of the Preservation Society. I want to start by thanking Dr. Young for her wonderful presentation on fashion, bringing the glamorous world of Parisian fashion to this incredible space here in Marble House. Our exploration of textiles is far from over. As Dr. Young addressed what people wore, our next speaker will share with us an intimate look at how people dress their homes with the finest in French fabrics. Nadia Albertini is the Preservation Society of Newport County's current French Heritage Society researcher. Based in Paris, with the goal of exploring the archives of Prel & Cie, a centuries-old Lyon-based firm with a legacy of weaving and producing some of France's finest textiles. Ms. Albertini has been working with our partners at Prel to understand their own archival collection and seek out further information about the custom creations made in Lyon and bound for Newport in the 19th and 20th centuries. Ms. Albertini is incredibly qualified for this task as an embroidery designer, historian, and PhD researcher specializing in embroidery archives and endangered textile techniques. Trained in Paris at the Ecole du Père and ENSAD, She has worked for leading fashion houses including Chloe, Chanel, Dries Van Noten, and The Row before turning to research and teaching. Her doctoral project at l'École nationale de Chartres focuses on the Rebet embroidery archives preserved at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris, with a particular emphasis on cataloging and digitizing the 900 unpublished samples and more than 5,500 original embroidery sketches. She lectures on fashion and textile history at the American University in Paris, Polymoda in Florence, and at the University of the Arts in Singapore. Ms. Albertini also leads international workshops and research trips on embroidery heritage. Her work bridges craft, material culture, and digital preservation with the aim of ensuring that textile archives remain accessible, relevant, and inspirational for future generations of designers and scholars. I'm sure we too will be inspired by her. Please welcome Nadia.
Good morning, bonjour. Thank you so much to the Preservation Society of Newport County for this invitation to present at Marble House. Indeed, I couldn't imagine a more perfect background to discuss the history of French textiles. My name is Nadia Albertini. I'm an embroidery and textile designer and historian, and I'm currently doing my PhD at l'École des Chartes, a grande école in Paris, specializing in history and archival science. My research subject is French haute couture embroidery archives and their use for contemporary creation. I am passionate about all things combining textiles and archives, and Lyon silk weaving is, of course, one of them. I am deeply honored to be here with you today to talk about the history of silk in Lyon and its unique relationship to the Newport mansions. Together, we will follow threads, technical, social, and transatlantic, from French royal manufacturers to the Gilded Age mansions. I am very grateful to the Preservation Society of Newport County, the French Heritage Society, and to the Manufacture Prel for giving me this fantastic opportunity to access a unique body of work and a major piece of French cultural heritage. Before I start, I would like to mention the fantastic labor that the French Heritage Society is accomplishing on both sides of the Atlantic. Their work involves preservation, education, and programs that allow French-American friendships to thrive. During the past 3 months, I've had the opportunity to work for the education program, and it has allowed me to work on the Prel archives, looking for clues in 100-year-old books about the Newport Mansion fabrics and their orders. I have had access to what in France we consider to be the Graal of textiles, unique of its kind worldwide, a memory of material culture that contains exquisite testimonies of how silk weaving started. These archives says so much about why it succeeded as it did during the 19th to the 19th century and even today. This magical place has told me some of its secrets, and I'm very happy to share them with you today. So, for example, this is one of their livres de moucher. These are books that kept the samples of yarns for specific custom orders. Okay, you have to understand that all of the Prel orders are made to measure, are custom made, and nothing is over-dyed in excess. Okay, so it's sustainable from the beginning. And the fact that these books have been closed for 100 years has kept the colors intact. So we can refer to this to know exactly which shade the orders were made from, okay? And so this is basically a 150 years old book, and it's one of the pieces that I had access to. So we know that France has an incredibly rich tradition of textile production, and this since in the Middle Ages. Cities like Beauvais, Paris, Tours, and Lyon have kept this tradition alive, for example, with lace making in the north. I don't know if you know about this, but the Duchess of Windsor famous wedding gown was embroidered with French lace, coming from Sophie Alette in Caudry. It's a little town not far from Beauvais, in the north. So Paris, Beauvais, and Aubusson were known for the tapestries. Lyon, obviously, it's all about silks, and La Région d'Occitanie with Ardèche in Cévennes was known for all the wool production and wool manufacturing. So if I want to tell you about the history of silks in France, we have to really go back in time, in the sense that we have to understand where silk came from originally. Okay, so I'm taking you back a few centuries. We need to explain to you where the technique comes from, and that requires a really big jump in time. So I'm taking you to China, where silk production was born. These two engravings shows the start of the production of silk, with silkworm farm on the far left, and then the harvesting of the silk filament by both men and women. So I have visited many silk farms around the world, France, Italy, Uzbekistan. And so the silkworm creates a cocoon, and the worm dies in there. Okay, we have to kill it. The span of life of these little worms is 30 days, about 30 days. It grows, it makes a cocoon, and then they boil these cocoons in water and extract the silk filament. This is one continuous silk filament in each cocoon, and out of that we make the silk yarn, and then it's taken to the weaving loom. And so they say that fire is the best invention of mankind, and I often say that the weaving loom is probably the second best, because you have to be aware that most of us here are we're wearing two types of garments, okay? Ones that are considered woven, okay, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today, and some others are considered knits, okay? So everything that is like a jersey and a jumper that's knitted, and we call the chaîne et trame or wovens, everything that's more tailored. So that's the two big differences, and silk has been most of the time woven because of the strength that it has in the fiber. So so we jump back to we jump ahead to the 15th century, and France has always had these traditions since the Middle Ages of fabrics, but most of that was cotton, linen, and wool. And in the 14th century, 15th century, France was buying a lot of silks and a lot of beautiful fabrics from Italy. And one person wasn't very happy about it. This was King Louis XI, because France was giving away 500,000 gold écus per year. Nowadays, that's 33 million euros. So back then it was an equivalent of a lot of money. And so he decided to take the production back to France and make his own, create his own factories. And I want to show you a little bit what sort of products France was buying from Italy back then. So this is a velvet with a Medici variation, a Medici emblem. You can see the center of the balls in this motif represent the house of the Medicis. And this floral pattern was woven in Italy, probably in Florence in the late 15th century. It's part of the Metropolitan Collection, Metropolitan Museum of Art collection. And this other example comes from Milan. So I want you to take a very good look at it, because we're going to find similar patterns later on in Newport. Okay, so imagine that France was buying a lot of these silks, and the production centers, Genoa, Venice, Milan, they were extremely jealous about their know-how and about their production secrets. And so they were given benefits or privileges so that the workers wouldn't leave, okay? But by the mid-15th century, Louis XI managed to bring some of these workers for Genoa into France. And we all know about Paris, and Paris being, you know, yes, center of fashion, center of textiles, etc. But back in that day, Paris wasn't the capital, or that's at least not the place that he chose to live in. Okay, he settled in Tours. Tours is an hour away from Paris to the south. It's a beautiful region of Touraine. If you ever have the chance to go there, really visit. The castles are fantastic. The Loire Valley is there. And it's considered to be what we think in France is like the purest accent, because it was never invaded by anyone, and it's really in the center. And the Tourangeaux really consider it to be the heart of France. It's really fantastic. And so Louis XI lived in that castle of Plessis-les-Tours, and he asked the workers to settle there and to start planting a lot of mulberry trees all around the area, because that's what the little silkworms eat, and that's the only thing they eat, just mulberry leaves. They don't eat anything else, and if you don't feed them constantly, I have friends who own silk factories, and they work 24/7, 20 hours a day. They feed them every 8 hours with fresh picked leaves, okay? So they're extremely demanding, and if you don't feed them properly, they don't grow, and so their filament is not gonna be strong enough to make good silk, okay? Nowadays, all the silk that we're buying, for example, Prel imports the silk from China. Okay, so over there they have massive farms right now to produce all these requests for the entire world production. And so the fact that Tours was the first center of silk production in France is something that is not really well known, that we all associate Lyon with the silk production. No, it was first Tours, okay? And the king decided to settle there in 1469, and he commissioned these special gardens to be all over Touraine, all filled with mulberry trees. And then he encouraged housewives to earn a little bit of extra cash by raising silkworms in places like this limestone quarries along the Loire, like the one that you can see here. So they would have these little silkworm nurseries in all these holes in the walls, literally. You can still visit some of them near Tours. And by the 17th century, mid-17th century, up to half of the population was involved in this female-led industry, from the breeding of the tiny caterpillars to the processing of the raw silk to the weaving, spinning, and ultimately selling the cloth. So by the middle of the 17th century, there was 11,000 looms, like the one that you can see on the left. It's still a very basic version of what a loom is, a weaving loom. And this is an image of Tours in the 16th century. It's always this idea of the walled city, and the industries were outside. And this is going to be the same thing also in Lyon. So Louis XI wasn't the only king that supported the silk trade in Tours. We also had Charles VIII, Louis XII, and François Ier, François I. But François kind of like did a little bit of a treason towards Tours, because in 1536, he also attributed to Lyon the privilege of weaving, and really it's quoting, cloths of gold, silver, and silk yarn. Okay, so this left Tours in a weak position, because he was giving Lyon kind of like the monopole of silk weaving, and he allowed the first two factories that settled there were people from the Piemontese area, so Italians that settled in Lyon and started weaving for the king, and they got a very special treatment because they didn't have to pay taxes at all. They didn't have to have any war duties to the country, and no militia service. So they could only dedicate their time to really weaving these beautiful silks, on the condition that they work within the city and not outside it. Okay, so it had to belong to really a local industry in Lyon. And so this privilege allowed them to thrive and attract the best foreign workers who came from Italy, and then the activity really prospered. What you can see here is a map of Lyon in the 1700s, and the little red dot that I put in the map is the neighborhood of La Croix-Rousse. And I don't know if you've ever been to Lyon, but it's kind of like on the, it's still inside the town today, but you can see that it's outside the walls, and there's still pretty much just nature and trees there. And so that was considered to be really outside town. They located them because it was easier to just set up big companies and big industries. And so it has been there since the 15th century. And so the Genovese and the Piemontese people settled there, and Henry and Marguerite de Valois that you can see here, they weren't still king and queen, but later on when he became King Henry IV, he supported a lot of the silk production and the silk nurseries in the Cévennes and the Ardèche, and that's just located south from Lyon, and so they were providing all the raw material to these fantastic industries. They planted really all around the region. So we jump to Louis XIV in the 18th century. And so what it's important to notice here is that the man that you see on your right is probably the most important man ever for the Lyon silk industry. This is Colbert, and he believed that the state, and that is still very much present today in France, the state, the government, needs to control a lot of the activities and make rules and kind of like decide how things are made, okay? So he was working for Louis XIV as Contrôleur Général des Finances, and I would translate this as like Chief Financial Officer of France nowadays. Basically, he was dealing with all the money. And so he regulated the entire silk industry, creating very complex guidelines about like how they should weave, what sort of fiber they should use, how many threads a cloth should have, who could afford that, who could buy that, certain types of brocades and certain types of damask, etc., etc. Not everyone had access to everything, and not everyone could buy whatever cloth they wanted, okay? So extravagant fabrics were produced in Lyon for members of the royal court, obviously the king, his family, and to furnish all the royal residences like the Château de Saint-Germain-en-Laye and Versailles. And he really believed in this doctrine of self-sufficiency. And we have to be very, very thankful to him because he basically created what we call today the luxe à la française. He started the luxury industries and set up this whole set of rules, bringing very, very skilled workers from other places like Flemish, Belgium, Spain, Italy, to create all these industries in wood making, metal working, silk weaving, obviously. And nowadays we have a very respected institution that's still working today for the luxury industry. That's the Comité Colbert. All the haute couture fashion houses, all the very, very high-end craftsmakers gather every year and decide how the luxury industry is going to go, what sort of project they should do together, what is the direction of the luxury industry in the future. And that's kind of like a direct heritage from Colbert. The Lyon silk industry benefited from all these massive orders from Versailles, extensive amount of fabulous pieces for the court during the first 2/3 of the Louis XIV reign. Okay, so for example, you can have a chaise here au treillage from Le Petit Trianon that is obviously a fantastic woven silk with a lot of details, and they would be what we call woven au gabarit. So you get like the upholsterer gives, or like the furniture maker gives a pattern to the weaver with the exact dimensions of how the piece should be woven, and it's always like a collaboration between artisans. And so, for example, here the chair you see 1, 2, 3 panels that are separately woven and then assembled by the chairmaker. And these are 3 pieces that are waiting for restoration they're waiting to receive new fabrics woven, for example, today in Presles. And so I'm gonna show you a video. I'm sorry because I had a bit of an issue. France doesn't allow me to show you French copyright videos in the US, so I had to find options. But so here you're gonna see, and it's only in French, but it's to show you how Presles is still weaving pieces for restorations and recreations of castles and palaces today. And so I hope that you're going to enjoy this little demonstration.
Le geste est le même depuis 250 ans, attentif et méticuleux. Dans la manufacture Presles, ils sont encore 4 ouvriers de la soie, les derniers canuts, à savoir dompter le fameux jacquard, le métier à bras, un savoir-faire qui ne se transmet plus aujourd'hui que par l'ancienne génération.
Pour placer les couleurs au bon endroit, en fait, on a une aide, c'est sur le carton, il piquait des petits pompons avec toutes les couleurs qu'on utilise dans le dessin. Et on a une cloche aussi qui est là-bas. Qui vient nous indiquer, nous dire attention, il y a une couleur qui arrive ou il y a une couleur qui part. Sur celui-là, j'ai 20 mois de tissage.
Mécanique puis électronique, les métiers se sont adaptés au fil des ans. Question de productivité de quelques centimètres par jour pour les métiers à bras, à plus de 100 mètres pour les machines modernes. Un panel de techniques qui permet à l'entreprise d'honorer des commandes d'ordre diverses. Damas cramoisi, velours ciselé, broché, lampas, essentiellement pour l'ameublement.
L'essentiel de notre clientèle, ce sont des grands décorateurs dans le monde qui nous font travailler pour quelques têtes couronnées au sens propre ou au sens figuré. Et puis une petite minorité de clientèle publique comme par exemple le château de Versailles, le château de Compiègne ou d'autres institutions à l'étranger.
Aux commandes de l'entreprise depuis 5 générations, la famille Verzier a su conserver le patrimoine des soyeux, sa richesse, son fonds d'archives depuis sa création en 1752 par le dessinateur Deschazelles. Toutes les fabrications originales y sont consignées pour servir de modèle de reproduction, l'essentiel de l'activité de la manufacture.
So as they say here, the gesture, because in France we pay a lot of attention to gesture, so it's the gesture for this métier à bras has been the same for more than 250 years. And we saw Monsieur Verzier, who is the 5th generation of the Presles family, and he's still directing this with his daughter Sabine. And so they have maintained the same techniques over this time since 1752. And what's really amazing is that they managed to turn that very slow technique, because they can weave up to, when you work on the métier à bras, that is the longest technique they have, if the motif is very complex, they can weave 2 centimeters a day. Okay, so you're working basically in front of the métier, and you have the warp installed, and you have to weave by hand every single motif following the very detailed mise en carte, and you can weave only 2 centimeters a day if it's very complex, and if it's a little bit easier, they explained to me that they can do up to 8 centimeters a day. But when you have to do entire walls, okay, or entire furniture, I think that's very, very complicated and time-consuming, and that's what I'm always trying to explain to people, that these are really works of art that take an entire, like, not only the time of weaving, but a person is qualified to do so only after 5 years of practice. They won't let them work in an official order that's going to go to a client before practicing for 5 years on those designs. So nowadays that everything is immediate and everything is fast and we want it all like for tomorrow, I think having that presence and that passion and that patience of learning that craft for 5 years, it's quite unique. And so when you're paying for such products, you're also paying for something that is much bigger than the product itself. It's tradition, it's keeping the tradition alive and giving this incentive to young people to go back into these crafts. Okay, because in France we have, it's not the case of silk and it's not the case of embroidery, thank God, but we also have what we call this orphan crafts that only one person is still making, and we need to find them, people who want to go and do that craft, but it's very hard because, as I said, it requires a lot of time. I can show you how they were weaving the Versailles panels, but this is a reproduction of the medallion for a chair. And they remade two of these panels, one La Bouquetière, and then the other one is the gardener. So Prel recently recreated these panels for Versailles, and as Monsieur Versier explained, 75% of their production goes to the more modern looms that can create up to 100 meters a day and that are make for designers, for interior decorators, architects, and 25% of their work is dedicated to reproduction for historical houses and palaces like this one. And so I think that one of the most unique and most magical aspects of Prel is to be able to recreate these historical pieces like they were in day one. The archive and the weaving teams can establish very clear and straightforward relationships when you open the book, because you have to kind of like work on two databases of 100-year-old books. One is the Book of Orders, and they are like dated, placed. I'm going to be explaining how they work this afternoon during the tour. And another one is Le Livre des Motifs, so it's kind of like all the designs they ever made. And you have the drawing, la mise en carte, you have all the threads, etc. And so you have to kind of like cross, okay, this was ordered in that time, and then this the design, this number. And so I have to go and look for the design and to understand how it was made, and go back into the mise en carte, look for all the elements, and they can actually put them together and recreate them like they did 250 years ago. So it's all very analog. Not everything is digitized. When I went there and I explained, okay, I'm looking for some answers for Newport. Yeah, well, here are the cupboards. Just feel free. And I literally spend, and it's been magical. I go there 2 days a week, every 2 weeks, and I just try to open every single of these books, and I take notes, and I'm trying to kind of like decipher how they were made and who they were made for, and yeah, it's been such an adventure, and I wanted to explain to you how the method, like the really work is done, and thanks to whom. So we have established that France has a long-standing textile tradition since the Middle Ages, and it's super successful, but we need to understand why and who made it possible. And so we have to thank Colbert, but we also have to thank Jacquard, okay? This is Joseph-Marie Jacquard, who was born in Lyon in 1752. And the little punch card that he's holding in his hand on the right hand side image is kind of like the secret to how everything works. Jacquard was an engineer, a textile engineer, and he didn't do it alone. He adapted two previously invented looms and combined them together so to achieve a much more perfected system and way of making complex pattern fabrics that in French we call façonner. Okay, it's something that has a design, it's not just plain cloth. And before Jacquard, this operation required 2 to 3 people working together. I'm weaving, and there you're like kind of like moving someone needs to be on top, someone needs to be behind, someone needs to be in front. And so after Jacquard's operation, this just takes one person to weave incredibly complex patterns. Okay, so this is what you see when you're weaving in the front. And I'm going to show you, this is a miniature version of the loom, okay? So you have to imagine that one person is just in front, and this is 4 meters high. We could fit it in this room, I think. And it has this massive amount of cards, okay? And sometimes they explain to me that to weave one seat, okay, one seat panel for a chair, that is very, very complex. Sometimes they need like a meter high of punch cards. And you're going to understand why in a minute. So you see the little design that's up there in orange. This system is made out of a grid paper. It's the starting point is very, very basic. It's a grid, and so every single thread is represented by a column on the grid, and every single line is a line on the warp and weft, okay? And so every single motif is broken into like mini squares, like it's really the idea of pixels. Imagine pixels, okay? And so in order to incorporate these pixels on your screen, because I think we can understand it better, it's one punched line, okay? And so the machine catches with like these sort of needles, and it's gonna decide where the threads go up or down or up and down, and that gives you the pattern and the design. So imagine, yeah, you have this much of cards for one piece of fabric. And so I'm gonna show you a little video from the Henry Ford that I think explains it very, very clearly how it works.
This is a mechanical jacquard loom. This technology was developed in France in 1803 by a weaver named Joseph Marie Jacquard. The key thing about this loom is that it controls every warp thread, the threads that go from the front to the back of the loom, individually. Because it can do that, the loom can create very complex, fancy patterns in the cloth more quickly and with greater accuracy than the technology available before this loom was developed. These cards are what carry the instructions that are read by the apparatus on the second floor that tells the loom what pattern to create. The holes in the cards are read by a series of pins up in the apparatus, and those holes tell the apparatus which threads down here should be raised for each pass of my shuttle across the warp. Some of you might recognize these cards as looking similar to computer punch cards. Back in the early days of computer technology, punch cards carried instructions that told the early computers what kind of calculations to do. So this loom is the great-great-great-grandfather of the computer technology that we all use today, and that technology started with a machine that produces cloth.
So I think it's really beautiful to understand how these things work, because at the end of the day, we're all wearing clothes, right? And I think we need to understand what is it that we're wearing and how things are made. I have personally always been very interested in the front of fabrics and the back of fabrics, and this is a very beautiful example. It's also jacquard, but it was woven in Russia, where they imported these sort of machines. And I want you to take a look at how the motif is kind of like the reverse, and there's like floating yarns at the back that are left on purpose to make it more solid, and just to, it's a continuous technique, and I think the whole front and back is extremely interesting. In embroidery, we always say that we have to be very careful about not only the front but the back. When I learned embroidery when I was 6, my grandmother would like really emphasize the fact that return your work very often. And what the weavers do is that they have sometimes a little bit of a mirror under to make sure that what they're weaving is beautiful on both sides. Okay? And so we go back to Versailles, and we have to say that the last third of the Louis XIV reign was marked by mourning, okay? There were a lot of deaths, which meant that no royal orders were coming from Versailles. And that, Lyon and the silk industry really suffered from that. And so they had to kind of like be inventive to survive. And I think it's in struggle times and in crisis that we are the most creative. And so they started developing other patterns that just what the king liked and what he preferred, because and this is to answer the question about like when was France not fashionable. I think honestly it started with Louis XIV, because he created such this cult of image, and Versailles was followed by like they were setting trends like the height of the heel or like the length of the coat or like all the rules that they invented, and Colbert is also responsible for that. With all these rules, you had to follow these rules to be fashionable. And so the idea was that all these other courts in Europe knew about Versailles, and so they were copying them in everything they wore and everything they had in the house. And so the silk manufacturers in Lyon kind of like used that as a trigger to then invent new patterns and cater to the other courts' tastes and be able to sell much more to them. And so what was fascinating is that they started developing all sorts of patterns, a lot of florals, obviously, but they developed not only one style, they had many of them. And what I want to show you here is the process of that creation process. So what you see on the left is the wash design, okay? It's at least at the beginning is just a drawing, and then they bring the color. And it's the moment when we're the most creative in trying to work on the composition, and is it mirrored or not mirrored? Is it symmetrical? What goes first? What do you want the people seeing it to kind of like go, their eye goes to first? Is it the bouquet? Is it the hanging elements? And then they have to move towards the mise en carte, which is a technical translation. And that step has someone doing it. It's un liseur. Un liseur is someone who reads. And so that reading person needs to read the pattern and translate it into the technical element nowadays. Today we do it on the computer, but back in the day they would do it on this grid paper, all by hand, drawing. And I want you to notice that there's little differences between the original drawing that's a little bit rounder, that is more generous in certain areas, and they had to sometimes simplify it or made the negative parts a little bit more important in order to be able to weave them. Because, as I said, every single line and every single column on this grid, it's one thread, okay? So you have to kind of like really divide based on the technical part of the machine, what you can achieve aesthetically. And then here you have the translation from the mise en carte to the actual woven panel. So I think the whole process is really beautiful. I personally collect mise en carte papers, and they're just wonderful. It's the designs, the washi, the all details in it, they're just really, really beautiful. And so what happened is, like, not only mourning can be a thread to the silk lion industry, but also wars and revolutions. And the French Revolution wasn't an exception. And so they suffered a lot from not receiving any royal orders anymore because royalty didn't exist. So when Napoleon was emperor, he decided to save the silk industry because he considered it as a potential, it had a lot of potential for the future of the country, also for their global presence in the world. And so he placed massive, massive, complex orders to the silk weavers around 1808. And these were just fantastic pieces, but they didn't have time to finish and to actually set them up in Versailles and other castles, because he was like, thank and remercier to the Elba. And so he never saw them installed. And these were presented to the public for the first time ever last year at the Grand Trianon. They had a fantastic exhibition with all the panels that had never been shown and then were kept in archives, and so the lights didn't touch them, the humidity didn't touch them. They were brand new, and we were able to see them in real life, and that it was just fantastic because the gold was still shining. I think it's a very good exercise to see that and to try to imagine how things were in the past, because what you're gonna see upstairs shows you kind of like how light tends to eat the color, and it's very, very hard to imagine what was before. So this was really fantastic exhibition. The catalog is really, really well made also. It's Soirée Impériale at Versailles. And we also were able to see the books of sketches and the orders and what Napoleon was asking for, obviously ends everywhere, and the bee, that was the emblem of the empire. It was really, really fantastic. And so we have to imagine that from Louis XI in the 15th century to Napoleon, silk has always been associated to kings and emperors and wealthy people. And when aristocracy shifted and wealth shifted from the courts and aristocracy to the American millionaires, like in Newport, it was obviously natural that the silk will follow. okay? So whatever we saw before in Versailles, now we're seeing it in Newport. And I mentioned earlier that I wanted you to remember the panel from Italy, woven in Venice. And I say that because I found this particular portion of fabric in one of the Prel archives. And this is something that was ordered by Ecole, furniture manufacturer from France from Marble House in 1890. And I think for me, it reminds me a lot of these Venetian patterns. And so there's a link, I'm seeing a link here from the 14th, 15th century to Newport in the late 19th century. So I hope you have enjoyed this and you have a little bit of a better understanding of how important these royal manufacturers were for France and how important it was also for the trade later on. And I hope that in my next visits to Lyon and to the Prel archive, I'll be able to find much more and many more answers from those beautiful secret books to bring them back to life to Newport. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. We have time for one question, I think.
Yep.
Does anyone have a burning question?
So you talked about that some of the apprentices have to study for 5 years before they're allowed to make some of these things. Do you have a robust pipeline of students and people that are willing to train and do this?
That's a good question. So they have to go to school, but then once they have the job at Prel, they have to work in a certain way for 5 years. It's after school. So that they do the training within the factory that they work for. For example, I know that at Urel, where I work, it's embroidery, and we have kind of like the same sort of thing. We have a year of like a testing year, a gap year, let's say. There's a lot of people that do what we call in France like a second career, okay, when they're a little bit older, reconversion, like you convert, basically. You convert to another job when you're a little bit older. We have a lot of that, and I think that that's probably people who are a little bit more mature in their choices, or that they have done a job that wasn't very fulfilling to them. And so we're seeing more and more of that the more passionate people are older, and have had also a first work experience in a completely different field and are joining the métier d'art later on in life, but they're probably the most successful. The young ones are probably not so motivated all the time, but it just requires time. And that's it. I think that nowadays, I teach students all over the world, and I see, and not to criticize, I still have hope, but these things are just evil, because we are like getting everything so fast and immediate, and there's things that require so much time. My father is a bookbinder. My grandfather was a cabinet maker. I'm an embroiderer. So we learn that things require time, and I think it will do us good, to all of us, to just go back to slower things. But it's a generational learning, I think.
We have one more question. The CEO always gets a question.
Hello. Hi.
Nadia, just for the benefit of everybody in this room,
yes,
all of these curtains are from Prel, and they were reinstalled or made, I think about 15 years ago. And
yeah, it's a perfect
we were
example
lucky to have the cards,
exactly,
the original cards.
Yep.
Which guided the makers of so this is a perfect example.
That's a perfect example, and this is, I need to go and get it closer. Can I go and get a closer look?
Do you want to talk? Nadia, do you want to talk?
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. So if you can get a look about this at this later. So we saw a lot of what I showed you in the video were just plain silk cloth with no real, I would say, relief or texture. What you have here is a velours ciselé, so it's a sisal velvet, and actually it's a double velvet. So you have the background that is just silk, okay, and then all the green elements that you see here are done in actually, yeah, two different ways. One is the velour, so the velour, and I'm gonna get very technical at this, but you can like put a little metal wire while you're weaving to create a loop, okay? And you leave it there, you know, as you're weaving, you put 3, 4, 5 together, and then you have two choices. You can leave it like that and remove the metal piece, and it's gonna remain and stay as a loop forever. Or while you're at it and you don't remove the metal piece, you sizzle it, you open it, you cut. So you use it like a little blade, and when the metal is up there, down there on the weave, you just cut, and that's gonna create the velvet hairs. And so you see the two different here. You have the one that's more like a little loop inside of the artworks here, and everything else that feels more velvety, really like to the touch, that is the sizzle velvet. And so this is the most complex way of weaving that Prel has ever had, and the silk weavers have ever had, because it's not only a combination of colors and a combination of patterns. There's three things: is the color, the pattern, the fabric, and then the texture. So it's the Rolls Royce of weaving, basically.
Thank you so much, Nadia.
Thank you, Nadia, for your insight into the important work you're doing on behalf of the Preservation Society in France. We're so lucky to have you as our French Heritage Society scholar. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lydia Kimball, and I serve on the Newport Symposium Committee. I'm pleased to join you here on the second day of the 2025 Newport Symposium. I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Natalie Larson. To the museum field, Natalie is a well-known entity merging the study of textile design and its application on historical furniture and within interiors. Her practice, historic textile reproductions, has worked with various important entities across our country, from Key West to Maine. She has consulted for the historic homes of 9 presidents, 3 state capitals, numerous National Park Service sites, and the White House. Larson has lectured at many institutions and received many well-deserved awards for her contributions. Most recently, she was honored with the Samuel Gaylord Stoney Conservation Craftsmanship Award from Historic Charleston Foundation. I'm sure there will be more awards in her future, and hopefully the contributions she will make here in Newport. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Larson as she presents Following the Evidence Trail, Making Textile Reproductions at the Elms.
Thank you very much, Lydia. That was very generous. Sometimes I have been asked how many museums I've worked at, and I've honestly lost count, over about 120 at this point. But it has been a really wonderful career. Thank you also to Leslie and Kate, Patty and Carola for inviting me here today to talk a little about the traditional and some new approaches to making reproduction furnishing textiles for historic sites. Furnishing textiles as a field of study has fallen a bit by the wayside in recent years. It seems there are plenty of books, conferences, and exhibits covering clothing, quilts, and needlework, the three big money makers in textiles, apparently. But what of the everyday textiles, the curtains, the slipcovers, the carpet, the sheets and toweling, mattresses, bed covers, dining cloths, and napkins? Much more than purely decoration, household textiles made the difference between comfort and just getting by. The study of furnishing textiles is relevant to historians because it reminds us of the importance of housekeeping and to the many people it took to care for them before the invention of vacuums and dry cleaners. For the socially elite, it was also a display of wealth and status. Of course, you'll see this here at the Gilded Age houses. In the late 19th century, the presentation of luxury furnishing textiles was made possible by improved technology in the weaving industry, but upholstery has always been an art done by hand. Expensive trimmings were made possible by cheap labor, and the daily cleaning, mending, and ironing of textiles was the job of many servants. Elaborate textiles needed constant care and maintenance to protect them from the sun and dust when not in use. The Vanderbilt house in Hyde Park has a collection of early slipcovers for many of the furnishings, which covered everything from andirons to beds. Since the house was only used or open a few weeks of the year, I'm sure this is why so many of the original upholstered pieces remain in the collection. To illustrate this important housekeeping detail, 2 rooms at the Vanderbilt house are shown covered in fitted slipcovers. Many of the original 1890s slipcovers are still in the collection, by the way, and were made of dimity. They were bound with a beautiful hand tape. This, in the 18th century, these were hand applied, but these slipcovers in the 1890s were machine stitched. It was fascinating to see that they had arrived with their furnishings from France with these protective covers. Accurate reproduction furnishing textiles can convey much of the history to museum visitors by using fabrics, trims, and designs from the period, textiles that are rarely seen or used today outside of historic sites. Personally, it's my goal to show visitors something new and provocative while following historically accurate evidence. Much of my work is in the 18th century sites, relying on paintings and other period graphics, inventories, and first-hand accounts in diaries, ship manifests, ship manifests, merchant accounts, and notes from upholsterers and cabinet makers. For example, this illustration from Sheraton was used for the dining room at James and Dolly Madison's Montpelier. There was no specific inventory to work from in this case, but we did find indications that window cornices were used. The window cornices that were reproduced of the same period were copied from similar ones in Presswood in Virginia. Occasionally, I get lucky and can copy original surviving textiles. For the House of Seven Gables in Salem, Massachusetts, early 18th century bed valances at the Essex Institute were copied using custom fabric and trims made in Manchester, England. Following this print from Hogarth, we were able to flesh out the remaining parts of the bed, including the scrollwork headcloth. It's very unusual to be able to work from drawings by a homeowner. This circa 1800 dimity fixed drapery in the collection of Colonial Williamsburg is very similar to drawings made by Thomas Jefferson for his dining room at Monticello. It was noted that he was inspired by Dolly Madison's dimity drapery at the White House. Jefferson includes the width of the fabric, the size of the windows, and sewing notes and yardages required. When I recreated these for Monticello many years ago, I was able to use his very accurate estimates and construction notes almost to the inch. Jefferson left many drawings and notes, even once measuring a bedstead that he liked with his quill pen. When he got back home, he measured the pen and then did the math calculations to arrive at the size of the bed he desired. Also, fun note about this was right before he marries Martha. The house is not finished yet, and they have to live above the kitchen. It's a tiny one room, and the bed barely fit. In addition to this, I'm sure the flies and the smoke were really annoying. Martha decides she's only staying here 2 weeks, and they go back down to Williamsburg, and he has spent an enormous sum of money to make an impressive bed that she just did not like, or at least didn't care to stay in at the time. The earliest example of a complete documented bed and bed hangings in America is the 1827 bedchamber at the Colonel Black House in Ellsworth, Maine. Now, I'm from Maine, so I'm a little biased, but I think this is the best documented bed we have. The bedstead was made and purchased in Boston and shipped to Maine with its dimity bed hangings. There's a two-part mattress. So the foot of the mattress is short and made little notches to go around the post, and then the square bit is separate. And I think this was because possibly it was easier to carry. And also the part that's going to get damaged the most is the part that you actually sleep on, so maybe it was a cost-preventative measure. These slipcovers are ticking with a beautiful check tape, and then they are made with a slipcover, which is hand-stitched, and there are bed bug spots still on the mattress. There are some other wonderful things in this house. If you get a chance to go, Ellsworth is right on the coast. That is an original Wilton carpet that is apparently never moved, and there is a bed pull on the side of the bed as well, which is also very rare to see. What makes this unique, too, is that the Boston cabinet maker and upholsterer included a drawing of how to hang the curtains once they were to arrive in Maine. And there are invoices including this 127 yards of dimity and the trim. Amazingly, he writes on the back side of the invoice a drawing of how the beds are to be installed once they get to Maine. And he has listed 1, 2, 3, 4. The cabinet maker even included a faint pencil note on how to set up the brass tester mounts. This was only discovered a couple of years ago, recently with infrared analysis. So the quote on the back of the wood is, "This height, or as nigh as the room will admit, to be mortised into the tester as nigh the front can be." So they're leaving nothing to chance when it gets to Maine. When I first started working in this field 40 years ago, architectural historians rarely examined window architraves for physical evidence of curtain hanging hardware. Originally, the most important piece of furniture in the house, beds were relegated to the back of furniture catalogs. In recent years, however, curators and conservators have started using rare earth magnets to look for broken iron left in the woodwork and covered over with layers of paint. Here you see archaeological collections at the lower left or right, and that's a bed bolt. And then there are tacks, probably brass tacks from upholstering and curtain rings. Also, we use things that are robbed out of buildings occasionally, end up, as they're torn down, they end up in museum collections like the little brass tie back that you see. And of course, museums also collect things from sales at auctions, like these brass bed drapery pins. This is paint conservator Dr. Susan Buck sampling whole fill at the Nathaniel Russell House in Charleston, South Carolina. Much like geological layers of soil, counting the layers of paint covering the whole fill can tell us whether the whole is recent or much older. With good lighting and magnification, analysts can tell if the whole was square for early iron pintles or round for later screw markings. This helps eliminate some types of curtain hardware and may point to possible design choices. In this case, in Charleston, we found only 2 good-sized holes on the face of the window frames. This reminded me of a circa 1810 drawing from Montgomery Place in New York, and became the inspiration for reproduction curtains now in the dining room at the Nathaniel Russell House. Orange may seem like an unlikely color to use, but the color and trims are based on a curtain in a New York collection and surviving upholstery in the collection at Colonial Williamsburg. When Mount Vernon was considering using this window cornice in their collection in the dining room, they were unsure if it could be early enough to have been there originally. Sometimes things end up in collections and the provenance trail gets a little muddy. So what we decided to do was x-ray the whole cornice, and this showed early rosehead nails, which helped date it to the late 18th century. The paint analysis confirmed the pigments were likewise early, and reproductions were constructed for the recent reinstallation in the new room. At Madison's home, Montpelier again, curators found a scrap of crimson damask wall covering in the parlor. It was well known that Dolly Madison had crimson damask curtains at the White House, so the thought was to show similar curtains at their home in Orange. We found a pair of early curtain pinholes on the center of the window, but only one on the other two windows. This seemed confusing until we looked along the top of the architrave and found regular small tack holes. Using colored toothpicks, we could see a pattern emerge of overlapping holes on the center curtain and fewer on the side windows. Mocking that up, we guessed what it may have looked like. It became that the single curtains allowed the sunlight to highlight the large paintings hanging in the room. It would have been really dark otherwise. Working in the 20th century should be easier, right? We may have photographs of the rooms and even original textiles and records to work with. But records get thrown out or have gone missing, and with storage at a premium, museums rarely collect large draperies. An instance where I got lucky in this regard was at the Frederick and Louise Vanderbilt House in Hyde Park, New York. Located overlooking the Hudson River and now maintained by the National Park Service. The house was completed in 1898 at a cost of $660,000. The 45,000 square foot building has 54 rooms and 6 floors. Excuse me. The house was designed by Charles McKim of McKim, Mead, and White. Much of the interior was designed by Stanford White with Ogden Codman, A.H. Davenport, and the Herder brothers. Excuse me. There's also some evidence that the Jules Allard provided furniture to the Vanderbilt House in Hyde Park, although that's unclear and still a work in progress. The National Park Service commissioned the French textile company Prel to reproduce the emerald green silk cut velvet in the original narrow 20-inch width, along with 2 cut velvet trims for the edges and rosettes for the faux tiebacks. The Park Service had the curtains available to copy, but I didn't want to unpick the stitching, which was original, to understand how they were made. Later, I found this cutting plan, and from the Met, an early 20th century sample book from London that had the same trim. It's the one on the bottom, and that was found after we had done all this work, but it was added to the file. One of those happy circumstances. There was a rumor that Prel had to bring weavers out of retirement to operate the passementerie looms to make the cut velvet. Oh, I got one, thanks. To make the cut velvet braid, but I felt honored to work on this beautiful project. It may or may not be true that when it came to my workroom, I just laid it out and admired it for a few days before I could barely cut into it. 2 years ago, the National Park Service curators came back with another challenge, Mr. Vanderbilt's bedroom curtains. Although the curtain panels do not survive, the valances remain in storage at the Park Service. Each valance is densely appliqued with lightly padded silk on crimson velvet. The edges of the applique were couched with a narrow cord trim. When the curators asked me if I could reproduce 4 of these, I quickly recommended our friend Ernie Smith here of Penn and Fletcher to help. It would have taken me months to do this by hand, and it was no cakewalk for Ernie either. Originally, the leading edges of the curtain panels were also appliqued and embroidered, but the curators opted for fringe only for the reproductions. All of the walls in this bedchamber are upholstered with tapestries. While the valances were with Penn and Fletcher, the tapestries were removed for cleaning and conservation in Europe. After 3 years, everything is back in place, and much credit goes to curator Frank Futrall of the National Park Service for completing this beautiful room. I've been talking too much lately. Sorry, I'm getting hoarse. I hope you have a chance to visit this. It's a beautiful room now that it's been finished when the Park Service reopens, which I hope is not too far away. A new project for me is Mr. Berwin's bedroom here at the Elms. As Leslie mentioned yesterday, the walnut bedstead and commode has recently been returned to the collection from a private collector in Aspen, Colorado. I've had only a brief look at the bed last August with Carola with the Conservation Department, and it's very interesting. The bedstead has a simple headboard with a footboard decorated with ribbons and wreath and folded linen carvings. This style of folded linen carvings goes back to Flanders in the 15th century, we think. It's very unusual to see it sort of paired with this wreath. But after listening to what you were talking about, Laura, yesterday, I'm not surprised that they're robbing out various motifs and merging things together. So we see it in architecture, now we see it in furniture. The headposts are carved and turned on just the face, and there's a recessed area which must have held an upholstered panel. There are a few tack holes which may have held it in place from the back of the bedstead. This panel may have been pleated with fabric, quilted, tufted, or perhaps embroidered with a matching wreath, who knows? Based on a circa 1900 Prell order book, Allard purchases 78 meters of wide, rose crimson damask, and a month later he orders another 30 meters of narrow damask of the same color, which is kind of curious to me. Normally we think of narrow damask going on walls and wider damask being for upholstery, so this was kind of interesting to see how this is going to shake out. If we can figure out the vertical repeat of the damask from the account books and measure Mr. Berwin's bedchamber walls, I think we can determine the yardage used for wall upholstery. Then we'll know how many yards would be left over for window and bed curtains, as well as a matching counterpane. Unfortunately, the canopy or cornice for this bedstead is missing. It may have been a simple lath covered in damask that became faded and discarded, or it may have been a decorative wood cornice now lost to time. We'll be looking at period paintings and illustrations from workbooks for any clues about this type of bedstead, as well as consulting with other circa 1900 house museums here in Newport, as well as Biltmore, the Vanderbilt House, Glenview, and others. And if you've seen any bed like this, please let us know. One thing I'm fairly confident about is recommending a tailored counterpane for a shaped wedge for a bolster, like the one seen here for Frederick Vanderbilt's bed. Distinctly French, these coverlets were even known in Thomas Jefferson's time, although he specifically preferred a flat crimson quilt for his bed at Monticello, not, as he said, quote, folded over in the French manner, which I think is kind of interesting. This, by the way, this survives. His quilt was made in Philadelphia. He liked it so much that he asked for window curtains to match. So far, this bed is a bit of a mystery. How far did the cornice extend over the bed? Could there be additional evidence on the wall? Could there be hanging hardware evidence in the window architraves that would be a clue to the style of the bed hangings? I look forward to researching and learning more about these possibilities, and I commend Laura, Theo, and the staff here for exploring this new research about French design and how we can further advance our understanding of the French influence in America. Thank you very much.
Please do stay, Natalie, in case we have any questions. Now you all have to have questions.
Are there questions?
very selfish of me to take the microphone, but goes back to the Elms. When you look at historic houses and you're focusing on a specific room, obviously not every bedroom, for example, is decorated in the same way throughout the entire house. Are you ever looking at the other contextual examples in the house and what that might either give you a process of elimination, or how that sort of, does that help you in how you sort of narrow down what your objective and focus should be?
Well, yes. This came up yesterday too, is when you have a 200-year-old house, which period do you decorate to? What do you interpret? Some house museums are doing sort of a hybrid. They're trying this at Seven Gables right now, where they talk about 4 different periods of installation and occupation. In that case, we're just focusing on the rooms that we know the best for what evidence is earliest, mid-century and whatever. So if in the case of these houses, it seems like they're done en suite. They're done as a theme. Everything is coordinated. So in this case, we'll be looking at the other bedchambers, how it relates to his wife's bedchamber. It's very small. We know that in some of the royal palaces in Europe, these so-called state beds, which were only designed for royal members of the family to come and visit, they had tiny bedchambers just off the side, and that's where they really slept. These beds of state were meant to be ceremonial. So I often, when I look here at the Elms and these houses in Newport, are these women's bedchambers more stately? Are they more meant to make a statement? And then the gentlemen's bedchambers a little more reserved, not quite so elaborate. It was interesting to see that he had a statue of Buddha in his bedchamber, so he's a fairly eclectic man. Any other questions?
What is a bed pole?
A what?
What is a bed pole?
A bed pole. Oh, bell pole. A bell pole. Yeah. So these were, a system of beds, bell poles that were throughout the house to call servants. And they're often lost, and you just see the little remnants of wire up there. The Ellsworth bed actually has the whole cord and tassel, so it's kind of special.
Can't resist asking hot spots for fabric lovers to visit right now. Obviously, the Frick in New York is a wonder. What else are you kind of sampling or enjoying?
Oh, good question. Well, I like house museums. I like context. I like to learn about the families and how each house is different depending on who lived in it. I just finished the Moffat Ladd House up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, if you get a chance to see it. This is a 1760 bed that was ordered from England, and fortunately the invoices survive. He orders everything en suite, the squabs, the easy chair, the bed, the window, and the side chairs all matched with the yellow silk and wool damask. We just had this reproduced by Gainsborough silk weavers in England, who still have a lot of point papers and cards. And I work a lot with these mills in Europe. Thank God they're still working. I loved your speech. But yeah, it's a wonderful thing to see a few places protect their national treasures the way Italy and France and Japan do. Any other questions?
No other questions. Thank you so much,
Oh,
Natalie.
you're very welcome.
You all settled down so fast. You're ready. Where's Natalie? There she is. Well, I don't know about you, my heart's pounding and my head is spinning because partly sitting in this room and staring at these walls while I'm trying to focus on watching a lecture and listening, but also just the information that we've been handed today. And Natalie, Nadia too, but I mean, these two lectures coming back to back and then the fashion lecture, anyway, my mind is reeling. So I hope I can actually even focus on this. But thank you, Natalie, particularly for taking us on the journey of a project in progress. And I think not just I've been hearing about, since I'm on the collections committee here, I've been hearing about the Berwyn bed for ages. And I thought it was like a done deal, and there's like a lot to go, so we'll get into that. So we really look forward to seeing the results of further study at the Elms here in Newport. So my name is Ulysses Dietz. I am a retired museum curator, and I've worked at 2 museums in my life, 37 years at the Newark Museum as the decorative arts curator and chief curator, and 1 year under an NEH grant, I was a consulting curator for the Preservation Society here. So that's the second job in my life I worked here, which just adds to my fondness of it. I'm also the co-chair of the Symposium committee, along with my friend George McNeely, who is somewhere in the ether watching us as we talk. Hi, George, wherever you are. I don't even know, oh, is that the camera? So on behalf of the Symposium committee, I want to thank you all for coming here this week and sharing 2 incredible days with us, learning, discussing, and developing a better understanding of Newport's intimate connection with France. I think we can all understand that better now. While we've covered many subjects, the Preservation Society's team of curators, conservators, researchers continue to find new connections that bring these houses and the collections to life through scholarship. Bringing collections to life through scholarship. It makes a curator's heart sing to hear words like that. Your support by way of ticket purchase to this symposium allows the Preservation Society to do this work and to bring these incredible talents to places like Rosecliff and Marble House to showcase the global relevance of the work done here in Newport. As the Preservation Society works to preserve, protect, and present the 3 Ps, which I think are very important, present the history of Newport and its design, Newport Design Week, the sponsor of this lecture, celebrates design excellence of today. We're grateful to our partners at Newport Design Week for their underwriting of our final speaker of the 2025 Newport Symposium. But no pressure. While people like Richard Morris Hunt and Alva Vanderbilt interpreted history to build places like this, Bob Shaw has to do the same all over again as the production designer for HBO's hit TV show, The Gilded Age. And I will just put that down. I'm assuming you've all seen it. Some of it, if not all of it. But I actually think of it as my job to watch The Gilded Age. And people ask me if I've seen it. I said, of course I've seen it. That's what I do. And I look at everything in great detail. And design is everything. And attention to details in design is what separates these houses from other houses, as well as what separates Bob Shaw's backdrops from his peers. He's been nominated for an Academy Award, 8 Emmys, and he's won 3 Emmys for his work in scenery and production design. His eye for historical significance in both subtle and overt ways not only entertains, but educates the audience. Bob, we are so grateful to have you here and to have you show us how you found a way to create the Gilded Age all over again.
Thank you. I can say that my head is also swimming. I just wanted to sort of start by saying what a production designer does, and it's my job to sort of pull in the work of various departments. We have a decorating department, we have a prop department, we have construction, we have scenic artists, we have people who draw the scenery, and it's my job to sort of coordinate all of that. Something that's unique to the job is each project is different. So even though I've been working in the Gilded Age for the last 5 years, I've did The Sopranos for 6 years, which, as you could imagine, was a completely different design project. And I did Boardwalk Empire, which was the 20s, and I did Mad Men, which was 1960. And you have a very short time to become somewhat familiar, conversant with the different styles. So 5 years, we just don't have. And a lot of people were very, very skilled in working on our drawings, but they'd never done this period, never dealt with certain kinds of decorative molding and certain decorative flourishes. And it's sort of my job to sort of kind of be the editor for it all. And so that's kind of a daunting task. So I'm kind of explaining. Everyone's telling you how it's really done, and I'm going to tell you how we fake it. So it's kind of good to have a mantra for you know, a project. In sort of the same way in the Clinton war room, they said, is the economy stupid? We say the old money wanted to be English and the new money wanted to be French. And that's sort of a general guideline for us. So the first thing we had to do, we had, I would say, probably 5 to 6 months to put the entire first season together. So that comes from getting the job, doing the research, having people start to draw things, and then have it built. And we actually probably would not have made our deadline if it hadn't been for the COVID situation, because when we shut down, then they gave us more time. So we probably got maybe a total of 7 or 8 months instead of 5 or 6 months. So the first thing we had to do was design our back lot set. The whole show is about the old money versus the new money. And so we have the brownstones on the south side of the street and then the Russell Mansion on the north side of the street. It wouldn't have been there in our time period of 1882. There was really nothing up there, but it was essential to the story that, you know, the Van Ryn sisters lived in this brownstone and watched this sort of suddenly appear across the street from them. And as you can imagine, they were horrified. So this sort of generally characterizes the Van Ryn sort of very heavy Victorian pattern on pattern, you know, lots of things at war with each other. And then we had to design the Russell place to be a completely different contrast. That always happens with me. I'm very soft-spoken. So this was the first job. So I've never met Julian Fellows. I revere him from Downton Abbey. And the first thing he says is, I'm very fond of the Duke Mansion. And I go like, well, the Duke Mansion introduced something that wasn't really sort of part of the architecture of the previous 50 years, and that would be restraint. And so, you know, I sort of had to gently guide it away from this 1912 structure and say, well, maybe we could, you know, do something a little different. And I had hopes of recreating the Petit Château. And, you know, I was looking at all the photographs and I was looking at all the carving, and I was saying, this is really great. It's so medieval. You could do a production of Ivanhoe in here. And then our director, Michael Engler, said, I don't want any turrets. And so that left me sort of trying to go somewhere in between. And I found fairly early in the practice that we had all this research and all these photographs, but they're very hard to interpret. So I tried to stick to things that existed. So that's why you'll find later that a lot of our details are borrowed from Newport, and the Sloane Mansion was still standing on 72nd Street. So that sort of became our model. And I thought it was kind of a good compromise, but I found out that at the time, what was written about this was referring to the cartouche over the doors and all the cartouches on the fifth floor, originating from an abnormal and dropsical development of the keystone and the medallion, or the heraldic escutcheons. It has invaded the field of architecture ornament like a bubonic plague. The cartouche is even more offensive than the perpetual garland because it can and does be applied everywhere. So, you know, a lot of these things that we come to revere, you know, at later periods were really heavily judged at the time. This one I sort of love. It's a natural for the Gilded Age because it has such an interesting background that Mr. Sloane built the mansion and he and his wife really didn't get along. And so she had a very long affair with Perry Belmont, to the point where, you know, they referred to them as the Three. Yeah, they were the fodder of a lot of gossip. And he eventually threatened to divorce her. She didn't believe him. He divorced her, and then she married Perry Belmont 5 hours later. And then to bring it all in full circle, his brother was married to one of the Vanderbilt daughters, and of course, Perry Belmont's brother eventually married Alva Vanderbilt. So it's the incestuous world of the Gilded Age. So this is one of the drawings of the Russell House. And as you can imagine, there was a lot to deal with in our short time period. We had decided that we would only build the first 2 stories, and then they eventually built even a little less, and the rest would be added with the computer. So every bit of this was eventually going to be either built practically or built on the computer, so it all had to be looked over. And so there's just an endless sea of detail of people who are learning this style of architecture as they're drawing it. So it was challenging. So that's why whenever I could, I just stole something from another building. So this is the front door of the Russell House, and you'll notice that it's somewhat similar to the doors of the Lotus Club. Again, that's because I could have our locations department, our fabulous location manager, Lori Pitkus, I work hand in hand with, and we build a lot of things, but we also have to go into a lot of historic homes, and she's responsible for making all of these relationships. So she was able to convince the Lotus Club that they wouldn't mind if we measured and copied their doors. and so that was how we decided that. The other thing was, it would be more common to have the wooden doors on the inside leading into the Great Hall, and the glass doors and the iron were on the vestibule. But that didn't really help us because it meant it sort of shortened the view inside the house. So I always look for at least one example to like back up whatever I'm doing. So like the Lotus Club, the wood doors are on the street, and then the metal doors are further inside. So that I gave myself permission for that. This is just an example of, the amount of detail of one small area. So you look, where is it? Somewhere on here, there's this, maybe it was, we have the same thing. All the curators are talking about finding the original sketch and then finding that the original sketch doesn't actually resemble what was built. And we have that too. So this eventually ended up being on the facade of the Russell House. But as you can see, called out across the top were pieces of ornament that you could buy. And so we sort of put all these pieces together. And so that's just one example of that. I had fallen in love with this detail in front of I think it's Isaac Fletcher. Well, if it was, I won't know now. It's okay, I don't think. Whenever I try to read notes, I lose track. So anyway, there was this beautiful detail that I wanted to add to the front of the Russell House on the railing. So if you look closely, you'll see that it's there. But I'm one of the few people who probably notice it. But one of our scenic artists photographed this, measured it, again with the cooperation of the Ukrainian institute that owns the building now, which was another one of those buildings that almost came within a hair's breadth of being destroyed. And they allowed us to measure this, photograph it, hand sculpt it, and then mold it so we could do the entire inside of the railing with this motif. And fortunately, the producers didn't ask me if anybody would ever see it, and they let me do it. So, I always say that we're Newport's greatest hits. And so this is a little bit of what we stole from where, or borrowed, or paid homage to. Homage is to steal with great reverence. So the Great Hall of the Russell Mansion is 30 foot tall. And so we ended up laying it out. And I always work in plan and then sort of give people like information to start developing the facades. And it's like we ended up with some massive amounts of space to be decorated. And so I thought, well, what is the biggest fireplace I've seen? And it was the one in the dining room at the Breakers, which brings us back to a little bit my medieval dream of doing the Petit Château, because this is more in that style. But I had someone send me something encircling this and saying, this is not real marble. And that's the kind of fan mail I get. So one of the things that I had fallen in love with was the detail of the column-mounted sconces in the music room at the Breakers. And what you're seeing here is the dining room. I decided to put them in the dining room of the Russell House. And we knew we were going to have the fixtures manufactured because it wasn't something we could go and buy. So this is one of our carpenters. We, on this particular day, had 3 different flat printouts of what size we thought the sconce should be. So he's holding it up and we're standing back and deciding how big it should be before we send it off to the people who are going to make it. And a funny thing that happened was we have so many balls. I'm getting tired of finding answers of how to decorate them. Because I get a script and it says, Bertha has really outdone herself. And it's like, she outdid herself twice last year. And I don't know how I'm going to outdo her now. I wanted to put these in the dining room, and then we had to change again due to COVID of where we were going to shoot the ballroom, and it landed that we were going to do the music room at the Breakers. And Julian Fellows came up to me and said, "It was very clever of you to repeat this motif in order to tie the house together with the location," and it was a total accident. I just liked this detail, and we manufactured it, and by some good fortune, we ended up at the Breakers. And I meant to say to start out that the show absolutely just couldn't happen, couldn't be filmed, it wouldn't exist if it weren't for the cooperation of the Preservation Society and Newport as a whole, because it was enough of a feat to, do the rooms we did, to do the Russell Mansion, and the idea that we're able to film here it was beyond our wildest dreams. The big irony is we come to these rooms, they look perfect, the fabrics are great, the furniture is perfect, and the first thing we have to do is move all the furniture out. Because obviously we can't have people, interacting or sitting on. We have enough problems keeping people from sitting on our furniture and ruining it. So we have to empty out the room and then try and find things that are at the right level. So again, the Preservation Society was gracious enough. I wanted to have a marble floor in the Russell entryway. And even though our scenic artists are really wonderful and are great at marbleizing, but to do like 3,000 square foot of flat floor seemed like too big an assignment. So we were allowed to photograph the floor of Marble House and then tilt it a little bit more to a sienna color and printed directly on masonite and then sealed multiple times to give it sort of a marble finish. And it's actually held up for 3 years. So hopefully when we start again in the fourth season, it'll still be there. This is one of those technological mishaps that can happen from time to time where the first time it was printed, massive piles there was enough panels to make 5,000 square feet of floor. And it had somehow become kind of like a psychedelic acid trip dream color. Because the marbling was mostly kind of like a green with kind of like reddish pink highlights. And it was just a misprint. And that was one of those, please tell me that this is the manufacturer's problem and that we can send all this back, because I couldn't say, can we just reprint this? And fortunately, they admitted their mistake. And so we have this pile somewhere of green psychedelic marble. We stole from everywhere. A lot of what we do is, you'll notice, substantially less ornamented than the actual Gilded Age mansions that we're imitating or being inspired by. Part of it is because of time, part of it is because of money, and part of it is because it's just too much visual information when you have like a scene. And if the scene becomes more about the walls or more about the rug or more about the wallpaper, I buy wallpaper, the first thing we do is like knock it all down, tone it down. And in the case of the Van Rijn house, we knocked it down 3 different times because it kept kind of jumping out at us. So this was we were not sure what we were doing we're making all this stuff as we go along, because we're sort of keeping the draftsman busy for the next 3 days, and it's like, okay, I have to have enough time off from scouting to figure out what the mantle's going to be so I can keep that person going. So it's like putting another log on the fire. And at one point we had just scouted Ochre Court, and it's like, well, we can do doors like those. And again, we ended up with these massive amounts of surface to be dealt with. And I was at Ochre Court and saw on the right of this frame, all these carved patterns, which brought me back to the Petit Château, because the photographs of the Petit Château, it's intense carving. I mean, the entry hall, there's carved drapery on the wall. I mean, how you carve drapery into stone, I don't know, but we don't have to worry about that, because we find modern cheats to do it. We had another dream of the staircase at the Marble House, and we sort of costed what it would be for us to carve, mold, the figures at the bottom or the medallions along the way. And it was just too much. I mean, and sometimes I'll ask for something, and even though we're trying to maintain a budget, someone thinks that their job is to please me, which is a strange thing. There was an overmantel piece that we used in George Russell's library, and it was all carved in. It was bronze actually. So someone simulated it, and they worked on it for like weeks, and then it was like, that piece over the fireplace cost $75,000. And so I had to be very careful. And, after that one little slip, I said, we can't do that again. There's an art director, and his job, unfortunately, is to keep track of the money and to tell me, you can't do this, or like, this is going to be tight. And then what actually happens for us is I usually start I draw the ground plans. And then I, pick some research, and I do some little roughs, and then I hand it to somebody else. And normally, they're trying to simplify what I do in order to make it more buildable. People were so excited about this project that they would do these elaborate things, and then I said, put it on my desk, I'll figure out how to simplify it, which is sort of backwards from the normal process. So we decided that we could achieve something that was similar to the Elms, although we added some gold detail because we, after all, are the Gilded Age. And this is how it appeared on our eventual staircase. I think I have something out of order here. No, or I skipped something. I'll find it later. The thing that took the longest to develop was the staircase, and you will almost not find any historical model for it because, very seldom do you look at are you standing at the bottom of the staircase and then see the top revealed, because these rich people really didn't want people peering into their bedrooms or their upper levels. But looking at all the historical models, it's not a great dramatic reveal for someone. We had everything drawn, and then we came here to Marble House with our director, Michael Engler, and he said, maybe we should do a staircase more like that. And all this was drawn, and I went back and told the art director then, Laura, that Michael was thinking maybe we should change the staircase. And she said something like, kill me now. And we went with this. But the idea here is that somebody, if we had used a staircase like that, the person is not revealed until they've already come down half the staircase, and then they sort of step out to the side, which is not inherently all that dramatic. Or the same thing with Julian's beloved Duke Mansion. You would see somebody from the knee down as they emerge from around the corner. And again, it's like, here comes Bertha's lower portion, which wasn't what we were going for. So I sort of was a little bit inspired by the Metropolitan Club, and where it's a club, so you can see the upper floor. And the staircase should probably have two runs of stair going down to the landing, but I eliminated one just for flow of traffic as they film. So what's great about this, I'm trying to find these wonderful examples I had of something here. Maybe I cut them from this version. That was foolish. Anyway, that's why this is a staircase that doesn't really have any historical model, because you could put the camera at the end of raise it and have it shoot somebody at the landing. You can see Bertha or whoever, it's usually Bertha, appear full-figured, and then you can watch her entire descent down the staircase. And you'd be surprised when you start analyzing historical staircases that happens less often than you would think. And then I was saying, well, we're not 50 feet like the Breakers, but our ceiling is 30 feet. So I could do a coffered ceiling. And again, we are much simpler. And there was a big discussion over whether or not we needed to build the ceiling or whether they would put it in post, because we wouldn't see it that often. And we did some tests and some camera angles, and they decided, fortunately, that they would see the ceiling fairly often, because even though the audience would see it complete, for me, it would break my heart if we didn't get to do the whole thing. These are, again, being inspired by the Elms. It's like, oh, I can do marble columns, and then I had a field trip one morning with our head scenic artist, Pat, who unfortunately retired on me. I worked with her for 20 years, and we had this vocabulary, and it's like, oh, we can do like this, or do like, and I call her for emergencies now. And she did this very clever thing. So we met on the Upper East Side one morning, and we were just looking at the marble on the houses, and we didn't realize until we went on our field trip that the bottom course was usually granite, for example. And, we learned these things by observation, and it was still dark outside, and we were at the Duke Mansion, seeing what it was Julian was responding to. We went around the corner, and the French Institute had not opened yet, and so we were like peering through the windows, trying to look at the marble, and then she went back, and she did this incredibly clever thing, where she photographed the marble at the French Institute, somehow fed it into a vinyl plotter, and had this way of using 3 different overlays of vinyl marble patterns with then some handwork in order to create the columns as you see them, which I think she did an amazing job. I always tell her if there was a Marble Olympics, she'd be the gold medal winner. And then since the character of Bertha is modeled on Alva Vanderbilt, we felt that she should have a similar bedroom. But instead of being completely just to completely steal it. Hers is sort of a pink version. Again, you'll see we're substantially simpler in our detail than Alva, but still pretty elaborate, which brings to mind something else I was having a discussion about I hadn't planned to talk about, and it's like how you put all these pieces together. And I was saying, figuring out the art becomes like a mammoth project. And I developed a rule, which I think is fine, that if it eventually ended up in a museum in New York, it probably belonged to some robber baron from the Gilded Age. So, fortunately, the Met allows us to get high-res copies of their paintings, and then we print them on canvas, and then they go to the scenic department and they do some handwork on them to make them look a little less machine-like, and then we do different layers of shellac, tinted and not tinted on top to make them look older. And then sometimes I've actually had them kind of punch the surfaces so the canvas isn't too flat. We decided that apparently Bertha owned a number of Fragonards and a few Bouchers because she could, and then she donated them, I think. We started with a new decorator on season 3, and she was all excited about this framer that she had. And I said, we have like a lot of frames, and they should inventory them. And we inventoried them and found that we had 600 frames. And so then she was new, and she was kind of like, the art was a big deal. And I foolishly said, I can deal with that. So I ended up with this thing of having to like pick the paintings, have somebody tell me, you've already used that Fragonard somewhere else, and then match them to the frame. So that somehow becomes a part of my job. So it truly is a little bit of everything. And then again, with the help of the computer, Bertha has sort of been acquiring a boudoir one wall at a time, because the first season we ran out of time, we ran out of money, and there was just the wall to the left that had the windows in it. So they had to have one of her doors closed all the time. And then they said, well, can't we have a little bit more of it? And then we built the piece across the back. And then the director decided she wanted a shot of somebody standing in front of a mirror, which wasn't very helpful when the room wasn't complete. So we finally finished it, but this was all taken from I don't even know where, kind of Frankenstein together by the graphic artist, and again, printed out and then applied, because even though we have people who could do that, we don't have the time or the money to do it. Oh, this is one thing people always find kind of interesting. So you make decisions on a series, and you don't know that you're going to be around next year, and so you don't know what traps you're creating for yourself. So we had decided that Bertha's bedroom was on the second floor of the Elms, which meant that we're going with this red wallpaper, wallpaper fabric, which was reproduced for us then. And we painted the marble to match. And in this strange directional thing, because the Elms is symmetrical, we say that Gladys is at one end and that Bertha's at the other end. But at this door on the right Oh, and that's actually one of the bathrooms through the door there. And then the director was like, well, it's so close. I want to have this door open. And I said, they would not have the door on the bathroom open. And he was like, I said, no, I really have to put my foot down. They cannot be like looking down the hallway staring at a toilet. So we kind of turned it into like a fake sitting room, and you go to the right there and you're supposed to be in Bertha's room. But in reality, you're in the room that was Mrs. Berwin's room that we use as Gladys's bedroom. But we're saying, because it's, reverse and repeat, that she's at the other end. So this is a picture of our stage set. And those are the walls of Bertha's bedroom. And then this is, again, the marbling. That was hand marbling that our scenic artist did, and the matching wallpaper, fabric rather. I keep wanting to downgrade it. And it confuses people, and it confuses our crew too, because then in season 2, Larry became such a genius architect in the space of about 6 months, that somehow he bought some other property. I can't even conceive in my mind of what it could possibly have looked like, and transformed it into the Elms in a period of 6 months. And it's a shame he didn't really stick with the architecture, because he apparently was like very good at it. But then we're in Newport, as you all know from watching the show, 10 years too early. That all of our stuff is happening in the 1880s, and all of these fabulous places were built from the early 90s on. And that's why I saw something where someone had said, well, Mamie Fish would have lived here. And they had a picture of, is it Crossways? And with it, which was, kind of American colonial revival. But that doesn't happen until like 1902, I think, so somewhere early 1900s. And so when we're just putting the show together, we were coming to Newport and only portraying it as being part of New York. So I said, well, we're in 1882, so she would still have a wood frame house. So that's how we ended up with a house that matches everything else in the show for Mamie, because we established it in the first season. And by the end of the first season, we got a script where it says, an elaborate dinner with liveried footmen. And I could not imagine where we would think that there were liveried footmen in the Ledges, which is where we filmed it. So we actually had to find another location for the dining room, which was in some other mysterious part of the Ledges. Oh, here's the thing I was looking for. These got out of order. This was me saying that even though this staircase is fantastic, as you realize someone comes down the staircase, they're on the landing there, and you're staring into 2 large walls. So that's, I always say in designing for film, the wall is the enemy. And you have to do everything you can to keep anybody from standing in front of a wall and having that shallow thing. So again, the railing was a bit of an inspiration, but not the stairs. And so strangely, this was what got me in the right direction on the Russell staircase. There was an earlier version where I had something that was similar to this, with the railing and the arched opening to the side of the landing. And we did that version, and they modeled it on the computer. And I said, well, maybe we don't actually need this wall. So we got rid of the wall and had our staircase, do what it currently does. And then I saw this little bit of railing, up above on the right. And I said, well, maybe we could just run it across the top. So believe it or not, from here this grew into the Russell fireplace. Fireplace. Boy, I'm really off. The Russell staircase. I knew it was some kind of case. So anyway, so here we are with all the elements together with our plan that we arrived on. All of our marble derived from the French Institute, our marble that was printed from Marble House, and our very large fireplace, a little piece of it that's from the breakers. And this again is like just a hint of like the amount of work that we were doing in a very short period of time, because the center area with the eventual staircase plan was marble floored, and then the other one was a parquet floor, one was a straight floor, one was a herringbone floor, and it all needed to be sort of worked out on paper. And one of the things that's become a post-COVID problem for me is everyone says, can we work remotely? And it's like, they want to email me these drawings, and then I'm sort of kind of navigating around them on the computer or a Zoom call, you miss things. And so, you know, every drawing like this has to be printed out like full scale, and then we sit around it, and then I take out my red Sharpie, and people don't like me anymore. Like, this is the ceiling plan. It was another, you know, big elaborate thing to work on. Tapestries are a tough one for us. We found some place for some fake tapestries, but don't ever look at them too closely. Again, you know, it's the real thing. One day, someone was drawing, and just wasn't really kind of getting the scale right. And I said, after lunch, get on the train, go to the Wrightsman Galleries at the Met, and look at the real rooms. Because what happens is the sense of scale you can't get from trying to draw from a photograph. So, you know, an actual pilaster might only be this proud of the wall, and everybody's first impulse is to want you to see it, and they draw a pilaster that's like about 2.5 inches out from the wall. So he started modeling things after proportions. I'm forgetting what room this is. And then on a field trip to Hyde Park, I noticed this beautiful detail where instead of having a chair rail, the way the ornament sort of curves as one continuous piece. So that's what we did. But again, it was one thing, and I came back from this being very excited at having toured Hyde Park and said, we have to do this instead, which he didn't really like hearing after he had drawn it a different way. And again, this is what we are simulating, but we buy all these pre-made pieces and kind of, as I say, Frankenstein them together. And you know, in a funny way, it's even trickier because you can draw something and, you know, have somebody carve what you draw or model what you draw. But when you're saying, okay, I found this piece, now I need something that curves like this, and I need to like work my way to the top, and then I need to resolve the corner. And it becomes like a real puzzle of trying to put these things together. And much like the some of the documents you have, like of textiles and what was where and what was ordered, we end up with like an entire like binder full of pages like this, which are like, this is where this ornament comes from, and this is where this goes, and that's where that goes. Somebody they arrive at the shop by whatever courier, and then they unpack them, and then someone has to figure out where they go, and then, you know, it's much more complicated than you would think. Anyway, and so then eventually it all comes together again. I have to block my confessional nature because my impulse is to tell you everything I think that's wrong. And we're not as elaborate as a lot of these drawing rooms, but when the decorator found this rug, it was like, oh my God, it pulls the whole room together, because it would be incredibly bland. I hope the drapery is past muster. I mean, it's so intimidating to be around all these scholarly people who would be represented in, you know, academic journals, when I feel like I'm more like People magazine. You'll even note, as we went on, I continued to pilfer from Newport, in that we had our season-ending ball, and this all sprung from the fact that we had to hide Elizabeth Drexel-Lair because she was too late for our period, and she was too awkward to move. And so we had to build something to hide that, and then it came up with, the theme was we were going to have the introduction of electric light in a private home, which we found some historical precedent for, where somebody had a generator installed, and they were the first one to have party lights. And again, this was really tricky because we wanted it to look like something that was rarefied and of the time, and if you do it wrong, you end up with Tavern on the Green. And we wanted to avoid that, so we sourced and we got these like extra large overscale light bulbs that were like, you can't really see it, but on the top of this one tower, there's a light bulb that's like this big around. So we did this in order to hide Elizabeth Drexel-Lair, and then, you know, this platform seemed a little bit on its own. And then, as a way too later reference, some of this detail was cribbed from Luna Park, you know, in Coney Island. And we had the problem of needing to introduce a little color because it's a very handsome room, but it is very monochromatic. And we knew that we were going to have a red carpet. So we put red panels underneath, I'm sorry, underneath the existing valances. And then we introduced like a hint of red into the final product here. But what I wanted to point out was, I put the right pictures in here. Well, this was the final scene. So you look and you see the garland at the top of our Elizabeth Drexel there hiding panel. You might notice that it appears a couple times in the Elms, and we had never filmed in the dining room, and so I couldn't find any photos of it. And I kept saying, "No, I know it's in the dining room." And so we were sort of inspired by that as well, and it, something similar to what's in the what do you call that room? The conservatory? What do you call conservatory? And anyway, that's what I have.
Thank you so much, Bob.
So much left unsaid, so I hope somebody has interesting questions.
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for that. It's amazing. I have a question. So you have worked in many, for like different periods, different times. What would be your dream projects if it wasn't this?
It's funny because I guess I shouldn't take it personally, but we've had 3 different decorators in season 1, 2, and 3. And at the end of season 1, the decorator and I were saying, well, what would we want to do that was different? Because we'd done The Irishman together. We'd done a lot of period films together. And we said, I'd like to do the future. And so I'd like to do something where you could like invent a lot of things and not quite be as bound to the research.
Have the freedom.
The freedom, yeah. If I could free associate that much. And also to do something, different. So yeah, the future, looking ahead.
Thank you.
That sounds ominous.
Well, thank you for doing justice to Newport. The folks who live here really appreciate it. My question relates to the furnishings.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent are they original pieces? To what extent did you create pieces for the sets?
A lot of the frames are original. Virtually none of the upholstery is original. And I was talking earlier with someone about the whole challenge of the door keeps closing on there are fewer manufacturers all the time, and Scalamandri doesn't sold their looms, and all the places that existed even 25 years ago don't exist anymore. And I always say, if the quote about Alva Vanderbilt was that she was never happier than when she was like knee deep in mortar, I'm never happier than when I'm knee deep in fabric. I just love choosing fabric. I love to I never pick wall colors or paint colors until we've chosen the fabric colors, because it seems unfair to go to the decorator and say, this is the color I've chosen for the room, find something that matches. And, so we like to pick the fabrics, but then we have all these quantity issues. And it's like, oh, this is perfect. Do they have 120 yards of it? and people don't have inventory anymore. And getting back to the cheat, the drapes in the Russell dining room are printed. And it's good enough for television. And what I actually love about it is it's inherently flame-proof. So we don't have to accidentally ruin the fabric by trying to have it flame-proofed and get the color changed, which has happened, or find them, end up with salt marks on them or all these things. But there's even a time frame for printing. So it's like, oh yes, we can do that very quickly. We can get it for you in like 3 to 6 months. And it's like, we have a scene that films like in 2 weeks. And so, being able to print, there's so many cheats that we can do now that we couldn't have done, at the beginning of my career. We have a lot of things computer cut, and we had to match some railings from a Gothic church in Albany. Actually, there's some Gothic elements to it, and we needed to add some things to it. And somebody measured it, 3D modeled it on the computer, sent it out, and it was all 3D printed. And that didn't exist. It's still very expensive. It's not like it's an answer for everything. But I keep forgetting the things I didn't add that were, again, borrowed with great reverence from Newport, like like the doors of Marble House here. Our Russell doors are similar, but ours are made of, there's a steel framework, but then all of the interior ornament was cut out of PVC plastic and then layered. So, you know, I mean, you see a lot of things where people do it now and they have one layer and it just doesn't work. And, you know, so we try to do like at least 3 layers per side, but the whole thing was fabricated on the computer. And fortunately, no one's like ever leaned into it or broken it, which is a possibility.
We have time for one more question.
So I've never held one of these before. Anyway, what was the director's aversion to turrets? Because that's a character. The house would have been a character.
I mean, I was disappointed because that house is the great game changer. And, you know, it put everything in a different direction. There were a few examples earlier, like, you know, the Jerome House and the A.T. Stewart House and Mary Mason Jones. But, you know, they saw turrets and they saw Disneyland. And so that's why, you know, I was voted down, and I haven't gotten over it.
Well, Bob, thank you so much
you.
for being here.